Councillors, good morning. It is 9:11. I will officially open round 854 of the Planning and Regulation Committee. As always, a very warm good morning to our committee members and visiting councillors. To Alicia, city officers and our support staff, a very good morning to you all as well. We'll kick straight into things with attendance and apologies, of which we have a full complement today. No leave of absence on the record. We'd get to item 3, the confirmation of the minutes. Someone happy to move the minutes around 853? Anybody? Councillor Peter Young, seconded, and Councillor Patterson. Sorry, Councillor Doran. All those in favour? The minutes of round 853 are moved. Conflict of interest declarations. Is there any conflict of interest declarations any councillors wish to raise? Councillor Gates.
Chairman, I have no conflicts in the relevant term, but General Counsel has distributed a list of potential conflicts, and I need to simply ask the committee if they wish me to declare any. So in the forward schedule, I have 3 conflicts where donations were accepted 9 years ago. In the 6.1, the road widening overlay amendment update, I owned a property on the Jacobswell Road 8 years ago, bought in 2009, sold in 2017, so I don't consider that is relevant. 6.4, in 2011, I had a $600 donation from RPS. That's 14 years ago. And then in the appeals summary, where there is no decision to be made, but I have an understanding that if I remain in the room, I am participating. But there are a number of appeal updates provided, and there are 5 long-standing declarations that I could make. So, if any of the councillors believe I should make any of those declarations, I'm happy to go and get my folder, but I hadn't personally considered that there would be a need, since they're outside of the relevant term by a long time and there are no prescribed conflicts of interest.
So, councillors, could I propose we'll just run through it this way quickly. So, Councillor Gates, you raised on the forward planning schedule some future items, correct? Did you have on 5.1?
Sorry.
Did you have...
I've lost my phone clicked and I've lost the page. 5.1 was the forward planning schedule, yep. So I will make those declarations when they come to committee.
And so 6.1 is Councillor Gates' ownership of a property on Jacobswell Road nearly a decade ago.
Yep.
Does anyone feel like that's remotely close to needing a conflict? Councillor Gates, it would appear there's no interest in a conflict of that one, so if you're happy to leave that as is.
Yep, sure.
6.4, what was the one there?
That was RPS, $675 in 2011 as a luncheon ticket for several people.
Yep. So, councillors, again, so I'm putting this in the public record so that Councillor Gates has got a defendable position if anyone outside of council ever raised this. So I would put the question to you again, does any councillor, committee member or non-committee member feel like something that far outside of the relevant term requires a conflict of interest to be raised today? Councillor Gates, no one has indicated that, so if you're happy to leave it as no conflict required on that one as well.
And the last one is the appeals, Chairman, and I'm happy either way. If councillors think it's better for me simply to leave the room, I will, given that there are a number of, there's a report on a number of updates on various appeals, but they're all outside the relevant term.
Okay. So, again, councillors, Councillor Gates has, in a core, put them out there as a possibility. They are all ones that are well outside the relevant term. I'd remind councillors as well that aren't familiar, so these are to do with appeal updates. So councillor and councillors have nothing to do with the appointment of consultants to do with appeals, nothing during the process where they can give direction, like this is noting an update on appeals as a very big nexus to a concern. So I'm very comfortable with the idea that it doesn't require conflicts to be declared on those things. Again, I'd put the question on the public record. Is there any councillor here today that feels Councillor Gates has a need to declare a conflict with the appeals update item? Councillor Gates, you would enjoy the support of all councillors here today not to raise conflicts, but of course, as always, it's your decision in the end.
I don't believe it's necessary in this instance. The decision-making occurred some time ago in reality, and it's simply a report to be noted.
Yeah. In that case, Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to raise, just in the appeals item, there is the mention of the New Crush Quarry. I have previously raised a declaration in respect to that, and just wanted to say my property is with the vicinity of that quarry. The previous declaration was just councillors allowing me access to obtain the information and communicate that back to my constituents. So I just wanted to raise that one, erring on the side of caution.
I think, so Councillor Fowler, I feel in reading the permission that Council gave you with your last conflict declaration that you're covered for this. Like, we specifically gave you permission to gather information, give back to your community. It's exactly what an appeal update provides. There's no decision to be made, it's just noting it. So I'd be comfortable in saying I don't think a new declaration is required just because of an appeal update. If you're comfortable with that, and again, if any councillor feels differently, feel free to raise it now, and we can do the conflicts. But yeah, that's it. You know, we're noting a report, an appeals report. There's no decision being made. It doesn't affect anything. It's simply noting an update being given on every active appeal across the city. So, Councillor Fowler, are you comfortable that there's no need to put a new conflict on the record?
Yes, Chairman, I am. I just thought I would note.
Yep. And we thank you for that. Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Chairman. Mine's a similar matter. I've previously declared a conflict in that I own a property within proximity of the quarry. A decision was made by Council previously, I'm just looking for the date, November 2020, that I may participate in decisions relating to the New Crush Quarry development application despite my conflict of interest. And the condition is that a fresh declaration will be required should I seek to participate in a delegated standing committee or council decision on the matter. I believe this is not a council decision effectively on the matter, but just noting that the matter has been dealt with by officers, so I don't feel there's a need for a declaration, but I'm happy to.
So, Councillor Young, I have a copy of that conflict of interest from 2020, and my reading of that is exactly the same, that we're not adjusting a position or a decision in any way, shape or form. It's an update on an appeal, as every council has been given on every appeal across this city, and I would definitely be comfortable in supporting no need for a new conflict for you today. Again, so it's on the public record. Does any councillor have a different opinion or concern that Councillor Young might have a different? Councillor Doran?
Not specifically relating to Councillor Young, but just, Chair, some clarification. The item 7.1 is in closed session and on grey paper, and I just wanted to get some comfort around Councillor Fowler and Councillor Young being privy to information here that the public isn't yet privy to. Does that create any other complications given the conflicts that they put forward? That any information within the appeals, would that further impede that conflict of interest approval that was given or granted earlier?
Yeah, I think the answer would be no, Councillor Doran. I mean, all the information that's in there, if someone makes a freedom of information request, would be able to access if needed. Like, it's sanitised information. But no, I don't think there's anything in there that wouldn't be publicly available if a member of the public wanted to seek it. And most likely, if a councillor from the back of this report goes, oh, actually, I'd like to give my community an update on that appeal, they can make that request to the EGM or GM, and the information that's in there will probably be given nearly word for word, I'd say, because it's just an accurate timeline of updates and where proceedings are up to. So, Councillor Young, I'll just finish with you just to confirm you're happy to proceed without a new conflict on the record?
That's my decision. Thanks, Chair.
Just to wrap that up, councillors, if when we get in, I believe we'll probably open that item up for a couple of questions. If when we get into that item, any councillor feels differently or feels that a particular question takes us to a point where you do need to declare one, we'll come back out of the item, put a conflict on the record and get back into it. We can do that then. Any other conflict of interest declarations, councillors? In that case, we'll have a chat about starred items. So currently we have 5.1, the forward planning schedule starred, 6.1, the road widening overlay, 6.4, the Hope Island DA, and 7.1, the appeals update starred. I'm aware 6.4 is to be unstarred. Does anyone wish to unstar 6.1? Councillor Martin. Which leaves a 7.1. Is the councillors wishing to go into session and talk about the appeals? That's fine. In that case, as per normal, we'll go with the one starred item being the and I'm happy to. So I think there's a lot of importance in the local law framework and the new planning scheme update that we will leave both of those unstarred for presentations and questions. So could I seek a mover for the one starred item? Councillor Doran, a seconder. Councillor Martin, all those in favour? We've dealt with the forward planning schedule. We're on a roll. Councillors, that takes us to the first item for today's committee, which is item 6.1, the road widening overlay amendment update. We welcome Luke, Jordana and Nate to come and run us through it. I believe the illustrious Mr. Prassar has joined us from traffic as well. He looks in a good mood.
What page is the new crash? Appeal.
Sounds like that's a yes. So, councillors, it's been a little while since we've had an officer that it's their first time presenting to committee. So while I'm sure we'll be on our best behaviour, just a reminder that as a general courtesy, we are always very kind on first-time officers presenting to committee. So welcome.
Thank you.
Best of luck.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I just need to figure out this device here. Excuse me. Okay, good morning, everyone. For those that don't know me, my name's Luke Hancock. I'm from the city's planning scheme team, and today I'll be providing you with an update on the progress of the City Plan Road Widening Overlay Amendment. The amendment was subject to public consultation towards the end of last year. This agenda item provides an update on the results of that public consultation and seeks Council's endorsement to make minor changes to the overlay mapping and progress the amendment to the next stage of the process, which is to send the amendment to the relevant minister seeking approval to adopt. And I've pressed the wrong button, excuse me. Okay, firstly, I've just got a couple of slides to do a quick recap on the purpose of the Road Widening Overlay Amendment and its history to date. As this slide explains, the purpose of the amendment is to create a new overlay in the city plan, referred to as the Road Widening Overlay. The primary purpose of the overlay is to identify land needed for the future widening of local roads, protect those lands excuse me, from incompatible development, and ensure buildings and structures are appropriately set back from these areas. The city's intent is to acquire the identified land when the actual road widening project is initiated. The overlay essentially seeks to better manage the new development in the interim to prevent new buildings and structures being built in these areas that ultimately need to be removed. So it's a relatively small amendment. It's a very short overlay code with 2 provisions and an overlay map that shows the areas that are required for road widening. So just to recap on the progress of the amendment to date. The amendment was originally included in a previous amendment, as in Major Update 2. That was removed in 2017. In 2019 due to some matters raised by state officers. Those matters have all now been resolved. A new amendment, which is this amendment we're talking about today, was initiated in September 2023, and it's a focused amendment purely just on the road widening overlay. That was sent to the state in October 2023. We received a pause notice in December 2023. It took a few months to work through those matters with state. There were a lot of matters, but relatively minor and mostly related to drafting and, I guess, fine-tuning how the code delivers what we're trying to do. We received approval from the Minister ultimately in June 2024, then proceeded to public consultation August-September 2024. And then since that time, we've been processing submissions and preparing this agenda item. So this slide just shows a quick summary of our public consultation activities to date. We had a formal public consultation period from 19 August to 17 September. We sent letters to every affected property owner, which was over 850 letters. We held 4 Talk to a Planner sessions where people could book in and come and talk to us about it. We held 2 events in the south of the city, one in the centre and one in the north. We had 22 attendees to those events. We had a significant amount of interest online, a lot of inquiries and a lot of phone calls to our hotline as well. In total, we received 63 submissions on the amendment. Attachment 4 to this agenda item is our consultation report, which summarises those 63 submissions into 27 issues. The approach we took was to try and summarise the feedback we received by each road. So some of them are quite long, with Christine and Jefferson Lane being our hot topics. So there's quite a lot of reasons that people spoke up about those. I'll just move on to the next slide. So this slide is just summarising the submission sentiment. So most submissions we received generally related to the road widening projects themselves that sit behind the overlay. So, for example, that was the first time people had heard about it, so they wanted to know what the project was for, when it was happening, and I guess, you know, how the acquisition processes would ultimately play out. Some submissions did raise concern with the approach of applying the overlay in the interim. Most submissions generally related to the impacts on existing uses in terms of the functionality, reduced development opportunities and potential reduced property values. So as I said before, most submissions related to Jefferson Lane and Christine Avenue, which was about in total 44 of our 63 submissions, or about 70%. There were submissions on the other roads. They were generally more minor in nature. So our responses contained in attachment 4 again. There's a lot in there, but in short, one of the key themes was to explain that the overlay doesn't affect existing development. It only affects new development that's applied for in the interim until the city acquires the land, and the city will be seeking to provide appropriate compensation at the time of acquisition. In scenarios where road widening areas affect existing buildings and structures, and there's not many in the overlay map, but there are a few, the city may need to acquire whole properties rather than just the required land. In these situations, and where there's demonstrated hardship due to the overlay, the responses explain that the city will consider early acquisition. This is an already established process and is currently occurring for several owners that are significantly impacted by the overlay. So we are recommending that the amendment progress unchanged except for minor updates to the overlay map as shown in attachment 2. And that's basically to remove any redundant road widening areas where it's already been widened in the interim or the designs have changed. So they're all just reductions to what's shown in the overlay map. In addition, and in response to submissions, we've recommended to remove the road widening previously proposed between 15th Avenue and 17th Avenue in Jefferson Lane. We've also had a minor update to the legend, which you can see on the slide there. Essentially just to add future trunk next to trunk, just to make it clearer. So where the widening is on a trunk road, but the project related to that is not yet in LGIP, it's communicating that it will be treated as a trunk road in future. So the next steps for the amendment, once endorsed by council, is we send a letter and the relevant part of our consultation report in attachment 4 to every submitter, and we send the updated package with the consult report and supporting material to the relevant minister seeking approval to adopt. The minister has 40 business days then to consider that request, and once we get that approval from the minister, a final report will be brought back to council seeking approval to adopt and to set a commencement date. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Councillors, questions for Luke or the team or for Mr. Prassar? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, thanks for the report, Luke. These will definitely be questions, I guess, on notice, just from one resident in particular. They were questions that were related to a meeting we had, I think, in November, and they just felt that those questions weren't, I guess, necessarily answered before this process. So they are questions on notice, and I have actually sent them through anyway. But one was just in relation to the traffic modelling. It was the residents' understanding that the traffic modelling, and I'm referring to Christine Avenue, the overlay in that Christine Avenue, that the traffic modelling would have been provided to them. And is that possible? That's the first question. Second is, it appears from conversations that there was a business case for the Marquerie Street overlay and the change to that. They just felt that there wasn't, or they're unaware of a business case for Christine Avenue. And then the last one was just in relation to probably a specific, if the area was to be, the road was to resume the front part of the property, that they would be at a significant flooding risk the way that land lies. So there were 3 questions that they just felt they wanted answered.
So Councillor Marshall has provided those questions to Alicia already. I think we want to make sure we get the response to that particular resident correct, and we're happy to take those on notice and get a tailored response to that resident. And we should be able to do that before full council. Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we've got those 3 there.
Can I just clarify one of the questions here?
I'll just check first, Councillor Marshall, do you have any other questions to put on the record for now?
No, those.
That's cool.
Yep.
So, and you're happy with that undertaking for a response?
If we could before full council, that'd be great.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you. Just to clarify the last question that Councillor Marsh put forward about if the resumption was made or the widening was made, that there'd be some flooding risk. Which road were you referring to?
Yeah, sorry, that was Christine Avenue as well. And, yep.
Councillor Martin, you have a question?
Thanks, Chair. Just when you touched on the previous road widening overlay, you mentioned in 2019 the state gave us an indication to take it out. I'm just wondering if you can provide a bit more context on that as to why that was taken out.
Sure, through the Chair. One of the reasons was the code previously had a provision seeking dedication, so that was implying that the city would acquire the land free of charge. As now that's been removed, so the state took issue with that and said, this needs to be run through the normal acquisition of land act process. So that has been removed, and it's now switched to it. So we don't actually talk about the acquisition of land, but that is the process that would play out. So that was probably the key issue for the state at the time. There was some other issues with some of the designs, I think, and how it related to, I think, the Bermuda Street extension. Excuse me, I'm just referring to Nick Presser, my colleague on that. So the designs didn't line up with some of the state's designs for that. So they've been aligned and corrected as well. So generally not huge issues, but I wasn't around at the time, not quite sure why it was taken out due to those, but the decision was made, I think, not to derail the rest of the amendment package at the time.
Next question, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I suppose for our area, the 2 key road widening elements were Jefferson Lane in Palm Beach and Christine Avenue in Burleigh Heads that borders Councillor Marshall. So 2 very different style of road widenings. I suppose I absolutely take the point that the overlay itself doesn't change. It's not a resumption now, it's just provisioning for future. But I've got to acknowledge the angst, that some of the community have raised. So just seeking clarity. So in the instance of Christine Avenue, is there a plan for the actual project of road widening? I mean, how long is it going to take for this, if this comes through, how long would it take for the road widening to take place and perhaps resumptions or acquisitions?
Mr. Prasso?
Thanks, Chair. So to answer that question with regards to Christian Avenue, it is identified in the local government infrastructure plan for widening for 4 lanes. If you have a look at Christian Avenue between Bermuda Street and Joanne Street, it's a 30-metre wide reserve. Then there's a 300-metre section from Joanne Street through to the Gold Coast Highway, it's 20 metres. So what we're proposing to fit 4 lanes in, you do need a wider road reserve, but there are also ideas and proposals about not just for traffic. There are bus rapid transit, active transport, and urban greening type of initiatives along that corridor as well. So we don't specifically have a project in our 10-year program for that section of Christine Avenue. We definitely have an upgrade of Christine, Burleigh and Joanne intersections, but that section through there we don't. So this is a longer term proposition that's in LGIP. I think it's sitting around the 2032-2036 period. So it's really about trying to preserve corridors. Transport planning 101 is to plan and preserve your corridors. And this is an ideal example of preserving a corridor to facilitate future safe, reliable, sustainable travel for the city.
And just to follow on from that, Christine Avenue, thanks, Nick. With any sort of road infrastructure or greening, as you mentioned, along Christine Avenue, I'm just seeking clarity. I mean, it's different to some of the other overlays where it's just a trim of the property. It appears as though along Christine there are full resumptions. Is that the case, that all of those essentially would be acquired to make way for that project?
Through the chair, so you'll see in the code, in the overlay, we really only require what we need, but in some instances the line either goes through a building or through a house, or it's in close proximity to a living area of a residential property. So a lot of times in those instances, when when the project comes online and is put into the 4-year program, and we start design and then we go into deliver, as part of that process, we will go in and acquire the property. What this initiative is all about is to give us a head of power to preserve, say, the 5 or 10 metres across the frontage as a development occurs. And in this instances, these areas along Christian Avenue will, if they develop over the next 10 or so years, we have a head of power to get a setback. So when we need to come and acquire the property, we don't have to acquire the full property. We've got the land there that we can acquire that's been set back.
Yeah. Just to follow on from that, so do we, without this overlay, would we still have the head of power to do that if we had a project? So it's hypothetically we're widening a lane and we don't have this overlay. Don't we still have that head of power for a road project to take a section?
So we, under the Local Government Act, we do have powers to acquire land, and we do have powers to acquire land compulsory if we need to. But this process is more about having a head of power through the city plan and through development applications to be able to preserve the corridor. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor D. Doran.
Thank you, Chair. Is there a road that's been developed adjacent to it that you would have liked to have had a widening in place before the development occurred? And could you give us an example?
Yeah.
Raffle it off.
There are heaps. So a good example is Macquarie Street. We've got, if you know Macquarie Street, it's a 2-lane road, and our forward planning indicates it needs to be 4 lanes in the future for a city of 1 million people. And there's a development on the northern side, sort of just to the west of Gold Coast Highway. It's a relatively new development. and we didn't secure the land we needed for the 4 lanes. So we've basically got the whole of Macquarie Street coming through, and then we've got a constrained section there, pretty much from the canal, from the Macquarie Street Bridge through to Gold Coast Highway. So that would have been a good one to. That's a good example of where we would have liked to have preserved, 5 or 10 metres across the front.
And so, if I understand that correctly, Nick, so if there was a widening overlay in that particular part of Marquerie Street leading to the Gold Coast Highway, and that development application or the developer wanted to put that residential tower there would have been a requirement for a setback to allow for the road widening that the city needed. Okay, thank you.
Probably just add to that too. So the
Please.
previous, sorry, I'll come to the microphone. The previous planning scheme that ended in 2016 actually had something on the zone map for that site, and wasn't carried through into the city plan, and this has occurred in the interim. So yeah, it basically means now the city would have to buy and knock down this, I think it's like an 8-storey apartment building to achieve the widening. So it's really all about preventing those scenarios, getting significant development in this land that needs to be removed, in 10 to 20 years in the near future.
I've just got 2 quick questions. Funding and resourcing requirements, it says implementation of this amendment will be funded through existing budgets. Obviously, my query is if there was need to do any resumptions, which there aren't anticipated, but if something happened, Christine, would you be coming back to council, or can you confirm there's no need for any additional funding if this is passed?
So specifically in terms of funding for this initiative, there's no funding requirement. It's a policy outcome. But in terms of acquiring land for future transport needs, that's an ongoing exercise. We've recently had approval to acquire some land along Pimpamar Jacobswell Road and along Foxwell Road as part of representations made by the property owners under hardship, and because they're trunk projects, we were able to fund them through our infrastructure charges reserve to make sure that those property owners are looked after, and to also preserve the corridor.
So for the author of the report who says will be funded through existing budgets, that's what you're referring to, so existing trunk infrastructure or resolutions around acquiring land. Oh, I'm just trying to clarify this. It says in the budget and funding considerations, and Nick sort of said that there's money for other projects that we've already endorsed to buy land. It piqued my attention because it doesn't say no, not applicable. It said implementation of this amendment will be funded through existing budgets. So I'm just trying to understand what that might.
Can we just clarify for Councillor Doran that in this report where it says that specifically talks about getting this overlay finished, acquiring property would be a separate budget and isn't part
framework
of it.
Yeah. No, I get about trunk. I suppose my question is that there's no money that's going to be required unless you come back to us to ask to buy any land. The funding implications that I was trying to get you to say is just the staffing and the requirements to do the overlay, correct? All right, one last question from me is with regards to Jefferson Lane, Chair, it says 15 to 17 Jefferson Lane was in and then it was out, and it refers to, in the report, not recommended to progress due to substantial costs and limited benefits involved. I just would like you to unpack that a little bit, because at some point it was suggested to be in it and now it's out. So if you could give some detail around why we came to that final conclusion.
Look, so originally, obviously, we had the whole of Jefferson Lane identified, but through the consultation, public notification process, it became apparent that section between 15th and 17th, it's sort of already developed, and to include that in the road widening code, we felt became unfeasible, that section. To the south of that, there are future development opportunities where we would like to get the metre or two across the frontage to facilitate a path, a proper footpath along there. Given the high-rise developments through there, it would be prudent to have a proper a footpath, so you don't have people walking down the road carriageway with prams and trolleys and those sorts of things. But that northern section there between 15th and 17th, it's sort of already developed, and it would just, we found that it would be unfeasible, unpractical to get that land.
I'll go to Councillor Young first and come back to Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm making an inquiry about Gilston Road in Nerang, which is depicted on road widening overlay map 14. I gather that there was no submission made. Can you please confirm that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any submissions on the road.
Great, thanks, Chair.
Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Doran, for the segue on to Jefferson. I suppose I'm just seeking from obviously, I know Jefferson quite well. One way, 0 footpaths. We've talked about it before in planning. So I am supportive. You might have missed it. Obviously, I'm supportive of trying to make it safer. But I guess I have some concerns around the width of the footpath, in that, is it still going to be wide enough to have both bi-directional for prams? I mean, any improvement is an improvement, but just seeking through you, Chair, to Nick around, is this footpath the optimum solution for Jefferson, or perhaps would a better transport outcome be other initiatives? I think we've talked about a shared zone, but just really seeking, is this footpath really going to deliver the safe and active transport and vehicle traffic mitigation that we need?
Through the Chair, so the road widening is to facilitate a 1.8 metre wide path. Obviously not ideal, but given the constrained geography, it's better than what's there now. But we have talked about this before, Councillor Martin, about Jefferson Lane and what its future configuration might look like. And, one of the options is a shared zone where it's a 10 km/h speed limit and sharing, all road users share the same space. Again, that is an option, but this one here is probably the superior option, where we have pedestrians separated from the traffic completely.
Yeah, thank you. And just seeking, thank you. Just seeking confirmation. Obviously, if we're able to get a pathway into Jefferson, just seeking the view of city officers around Ocean Way and whether that negates the need for Ocean Way or whether it doesn't.
Through the Chair, so at the Transport and Infrastructure Committee meeting on the 6th of May, a report is being submitted about Ocean Way implementation, and that includes an Ocean Way through Palm Beach, through those sections that currently don't have one. As you all know, there are some coastal resilience factors that need to be factored into that, but the plan is to have a 36 kilometre Ocean Way from the Spit to Coolangatta, high quality. So this through Jefferson Lane doesn't forego the Ocean Way through Palm Beach.
Right. Thank you. And so, I was just wondering, I've noticed in the report, this pathway is non-trunk, non-LGIP. So just for me, is it correct in that essentially then we don't have that reserve contributions and that it needs to be worked into the whole of city budget? Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, okay. And the final question, Chair. With the overlay, is any future stage when the project comes in still subject to council resolution? As in today, if we make this overlay come through, is there still going to be, is the project still going to come back to council before it's proceeded with?
Yes.
Thank you.
Nick, could I just clarify, in that circumstance along Jefferson, it would be that as individual DAs come in, we would seek to get that strip of land at that time. So not necessarily a separate footpath project. It would be through individual DA decisions taking that strip of land. That'd be accurate?
That's correct, yes.
Yep. Does that clarify for you, Councillor Martin?
Yeah, I suppose a good clarification. There's obviously the DA. If there's an impact DA, I get that happens ongoing, as it has been. But if the city were to want to take the next step of acquiring remaining sections, be it Christine Ave or Jefferson Lane, if it's a city-led project, would that I assume that budget and that proposal would still come back to council so we can discuss that, as the nuances of that?
If we, through DAs, have ended up with 5 or 6 of the sections and there's 5 or 6 more to go, and those property owners were open to negotiating with the city to acquire it so that the footpath could be brought forward, is that an option? Kind of where we're getting to?
Absolutely.
Yep.
That's the question.
Nick, you're...
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillors, any other questions on this item for officers? In that case, I'm happy to move the item, and there's a seconder for the item, Councillor Gates. I'm not going to go into a lengthy debate in it, only as you can tell from the history that was given from officers, this is an item that has been around since 2019. And as Luke pointed out, it was actually a failure in the 2016 scheme where we allowed some of these things to drop out. So it's reintroducing that back into place. I fully appreciate that whenever council or government is talking about taking any amount of land off any landowner, that it's always going to create some emotion and contention, and that landowners and community are rightly going to want to have all their answers questioned. And I thank Councillor Marshall for being here today to put some of those additional questions on the record, and we'll get those answers before full council. So while I very much respect that emotion and concern from the community and their absolute right to information of why these projects are needed for a growing city, I also acknowledge that we are planning a growing city, and that these being identified now and identified this way brings surety for everybody to understand what is going on, and allows our officers who are planning projects a decade, 15 years in advance to get on with that work. Does anyone wish to speak against the item? Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not negating the need for road projects, safety projects. I think I'm fine with that. I just want to acknowledge the homeowners that sort of this process. While I accept that this puts sort of future development on notice and is more efficient for the ratepayer around, once things are developed, that it's too expensive to go backwards. But what it's done is really, I guess, cast a shadow over some residents, the mum and dads that have, I had some in Jefferson that have just finished their pool, which the road widening would take up that area, or it's in part of their house. So I think for me, I would have preferred the project, have a tangible product, and we talk acquisitions at that point. So it's really just that the queries and that it was catching residents off guard that had literally just developed a code accessible DA and then were completely unaware. So I find it difficult, as totally acknowledge Councillor Hamill, what you said about any talk of resumptions is probably the worst thing. One of the worst things we look at council, but obviously we've got a plan for a growing city. So I wanted to put that on record.
Speaker for the motion. In that case, I'll just close by saying I think Councillor Martin has put out an excellent point of why it's so important to get this right, because you've got very real examples of code approvals that are now got a new overlay appearing. That's what we want to avoid with this. So by putting this through, it means that hopefully we don't have that example happening again. And this is, there will be further passes and updates to this in the future to hopefully make sure that exact scenario doesn't happen, where people, especially mum and dads, invest their money and start building their dream to be told government needs to take part of the land. So the more work we do in this space, the more we can be looking to the future and locking down these overlays, the less chance there is that of occurring. Councillors, with that, I will close debate. Take the vote. All in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Councillors, if you would indulge me, could I seek a 10-minute adjournment just quickly? So meeting adjourned. Councillors, thank you for the short adjournment. We will recommence the meeting at 10:08. Item 6.1 has been dealt with, which takes us to item 6.2. We welcome officers to the chamber. Very good morning to you folks. I think Stuart is presenting today. Good morning to you, Stuart.
Morning.
And we'll kick straight into the presentation.
Okay, I'm going to get this right one. Okay, good morning, councillors. Today we're seeking your endorsement for a proposed local law framework for the city, so that city officers then can use that framework to start commence drafting our new city laws in alignment with that framework. Your support is also being sought for a revised local law making process, which will make minor improvements to the previously adopted process from 2016, which whilst still complying with the city's obligations under the Local Government Act. So what is the proposed local law framework and why do we need one? The proposed framework is essentially a plan for our future local laws. Besides the previously adopted local law making process that I just mentioned, the city does not have a formal framework for the creation or amendment of local laws or subordinate local laws. The last formal review of our local laws was completed in 2013, which did not address all of the issues created in the ad hoc amendments to our local laws over time. While the existing laws are functional, not having a formalised framework to follow when amending our city laws has resulted in duplications with state legislative provisions and also duplications in some processes, numerous approval types being utilised in different local laws with no evident reason. There are some outdated local laws and also inconsistencies in processes and formatting across many of them. So we've conducted a preliminary benchmarking exercise against the state government's model local laws, as well as other South East Queensland local government councils. So a model local law is a local law template that has been approved by the Minister of Local Government as being suitable for adoption by all Queensland local governments. These model local laws were created back in 2010 to support the introduction of the then new Local Government Act. This preliminary benchmarking has provided valuable insights into the number and scope of local laws adopted by other councils, enabling us to compare our current framework and make informed decisions on necessary reforms. For instance, as we can see from this comparative table, the City of Gold Coast has considerably more local laws and subordinate local laws than both the model local laws, seen in red, and all other SEQ councils. That is, we have 51 total laws against 14 model local laws, and notably some of the more recently reviewed local laws in other SEQ councils, such as Redland, Sunny Coast and Noosa, have moved towards incorporating the model local law framework. Councils that have taken the ad hoc and piecemeal approach, such as Gold Coast, Logan and Brisbane, have least resemblance to those model local laws. To address the identified issues with our local laws, a new local law framework is proposed. The key elements of the framework include a reduction of the overall number of laws. Specifically, we propose to reduce the number of laws from 20 to 9, or specifically local laws from 20 to 9, and subordinate local laws from 31 to 7. This will help streamline the regulatory environment, make it more efficient and easier to navigate for both city officers and residents. Currently, there are many duplications and unnecessary complexities within our laws. We aim to eliminate any duplicated provisions, which includes removal of provisions that are otherwise captured in state laws. It includes consolidating common administrative provisions such as officer tools and powers into a new administration local law, resulting in much standardisation of process. We will reduce unnecessary complexities, ensuring that each law serves a clear purpose without redundancy. We will move towards we will move from inconsistent drafting styles and formats currently present across a number of our laws to a consistent drafting style across each of our proposed laws. The laws will be drafted in compliance with the state government's guideline for drafting of local laws. We will consolidate approvals, further simplifying current complexities in our local laws. For instance, our laws currently apply numerous terms for approvals such as licences, permits, registrations and approvals. We will look to consolidate those terms and also the numerous differing approval-related provisions by centralising general requirements, making it easier for both applicants and city officers to navigate. We'll ensure that each relevant current provision is transferred to the proposed local laws, whilst removing any redundant provisions and identifying any new contemporary provisions in the process to propose to make step of the local law making process. We will ensure that each relevant current provision, mentioned that one. Finally, we propose to move from a set of local laws without structure to a local law framework that is based off the state government's model local laws, but modified to suit our needs. Apart from the benefits already outlined, this will serve to further align our local law framework with other SEQ councils. Okay, officers will consider the following. Sorry, have I mixed up my slides? Sorry about that. Thank you. Okay. As mentioned, the proposed framework consolidates a number of our city laws, largely based on the categorisation of similar subject matter. 9 proposed local laws can be seen, which are outlined in the left-hand column. Those laws that are proposed to be consolidated to within those laws can be seen in the left-hand column. This may be in part or in whole. As you can see, some of the proposed laws will remain standalone, such as the waste management, animal management, major events and bathing reserves local laws, whereas considerable consolidation is proposed with the remainder for the reasons outlined in the previous slide. Similar mapping can be seen for our subordinate local laws within the report. An example of a consolidated law is the newly proposed administration local law, which will contain general provisions that will be applicable to each of the other proposed laws, subject to certain exemptions. For instance, approval processes, review and legal proceedings, officer tools and powers. As you can see, there is considerable consolidation proposed within this new local law and subordinate local law, including our existing administration local law number 3, and our licensing local law number 16. Okay, so officers will consider the following in drafting the new laws. So the currency of existing policy positions and provisions to represent council city operational requirements and community needs, a consistent styling and formatting, and inclusion of all amendments or local law amendments that have either commenced or have been identified for commencement, including the vegetation management local law 6. You may recall council resolved to commence the process for this local law. However, since this resolution, further changes have been proposed to the local law by officers, and officers were proposing to return to council to recommence the law-making process with an alternative proposed local law. The public camping areas subordinate local law, this committee resolved to defer an item proposing to amend these laws to a later committee meeting. The review of all the city laws will include the interrogation of the city's approvals framework, including the application of each of its existing permits. And then the advertising devices local law, which council recently resolved to commence the process of drafting an amendment to the law to embed the election signage standards endorsed at the same meeting. And the regulated parking local law number 2, that local law making process is currently underway. That will remain unaffected by this process. Should council approve the resolutions in this report, the City Standards Branch will commence the drafting of all the proposed local laws in consultation with city stakeholders. When drafting is complete for all proposed laws, a report will be brought back to Council recommending to propose to make all of the proposed laws and to propose to repeal or each of the existing laws. This is expected by June next year. The lawmaking process is expected to take 9 to 12 months after that point. Okay, so we would also like you to consider approving a new local lawmaking process for the city. So why is it needed? As previously mentioned, our current process was adopted by Council in 2016, so it is considered prudent to review this process whilst reviewing our local laws generally. The Local Government Act states that the local government may decide its own process for the making of a local law, provided that it is not inconsistent with the Act. Whilst it should be noted that our current process complies with the requirements of the Act, the following improvements have been identified to further refine the process. Firstly, inclusion of a new preliminary step to reflect the preliminary planning stages of the process, an additional sub-step to the state consultation step to clarify how Council is to deal with state government feedback. We propose to remove the requirements to advertise in a local newspaper during the public consultation step, as there is no specific requirement in the Act requiring us to do so, and other means of advertising is deemed to have a better reach. We're also clarifying the city's responsibilities to identify and act upon possible anti-competitive provisions. You will note that we have adjusted the indicative timeframes to more accurately reflect the time taken to complete each step. Finally, we have added a new process, Part 5, for making a local law or subordinate local law that only requires administrative amendments. This new streamlined process enables Council to reduce the number of law-making steps in this instance due to the negligible impact of the amendment being proposed. Specifically, the process will only require a single Council resolution to make the proposed law, as opposed to the requirement to also seek approval to commence the lawmaking process, and nor will a public consultation step be required, as these type of amendments will not impact the substantive rights of the community. For the purposes of this process, administrative amendments is a proposed amendment that only corrects or changes the format or presentation, redundant provisions, grammatical errors, cross-references, or a factual matter incorrectly stated. So what's next? Should Council endorse our recommendations, the new local lawmaking process will take effect, and the City Standards Branch will ensure that all new or amended local laws are made in accordance with the new process. Thank you. Yeah.
Stuart, can I just start by acknowledging it is very clear in that presentation that you have all been very busy for the last 12 months on your approach and thinking behind this. It's quite a significant piece of work that's been undertaken in a very different framework. So I just wanted to acknowledge that up front. But now open the floor to questions from councillors for Stuart and the team. Councillor Doran.
Thank you. I'd like to first start by clarifying the timelines changes. Can you just unlock what the difference might look like for the proposed new timelines for new local laws as opposed to what they are now?
Through the chair, yes. So the timelines, we're looking at about a 12 to 15 month timeline to draft each of the local laws. There's obviously a lot of work involved in doing that, in liaising with all the stakeholders. So the plan is to return to Council roughly between, say, May or June.
Sorry, just to clarify. Sorry, I wasn't. I didn't frame that question well enough. I meant, was there a change to, if we make a new law, we have to go through the advertising period, and it's a long period. Will there be any change to the structure of getting approval for a new law under the new framework?
So you're talking about the local lawmaking process. So essentially, there's no major changes in terms of the process. Our current process does comply with the requirements of the Local Government Act. So it really is more a case of the existing estimated timeframes that are listed on our current process being inaccurate. They're not accurately reflecting the actual time that it takes to undertake that process. Yeah.
Thank you. And just so if I was to summarise it for my own benefit, this is a streamlined process coordinating the implementation of laws from 51 down to 16. But it doesn't actually, at this point of the structure, we're not actually changing any of the content. You're going to come back once we have the framework in place, and if there is any amendments to the content at that point, there'll be a separate discussion.
Correct. Yes, we'll make sure that all of the existing provisions are transitioned into the new laws, and that any changes to existing provisions that, in terms of the policy content of those provisions, will certainly be identifying the rationale for our proposed changes during that proposed to make step.
Just one last question, Chair. Just curious as to why we're leaving out local law number 1. I think it's the only one that was called out as to not be included.
Yeah. Through the Chair, I just believe that there was no desire to include local law 1 into the scope of this set of amendments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is local, just clarify.
So I actually had clarification I'll take, otherwise I go to Councillor Fowler for a question.
I'd like to just clarify, is local law 1 model meeting procedures? Is that? Okay.
Correct.
Thanks.
Councillor Fowler, your question.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. We've recently, in the Governance Committee, we're going through a process with our policy reviews, and we've had a couple of false starts just in terms of the format of that and the volume and the work it takes. As councillors, we're looking at the old policy, we're looking at the new policy, we're looking at what's been renewed, and we're making feedback and decisions based on that, which is our role. I'm concerned with the volume of this. So I'm not sure if there's been any consideration to what that looks like, whether it's February where it comes back into a full report. This looks like a big body of work and a lot of review. And if we as councils are looking at the old laws, we're looking at the new ones, it's just, is it the best way forward, and is that volume of work, or should it be more of a staged approach, is my question.
Through the Chair, it definitely is a large body of work. The focus certainly will be on transitioning existing provisions to the new proposed local laws, so making sure that we don't miss anything that we currently have. But if there's easily identified provisions that are duplicated, that are out of date, those type of things, we'll be looking to remove those. But those provisions where there are alternative policy positions, we'll certainly give our stakeholders prior opportunity to consider any of those policy positions prior to our formal sort of workshops that we'll undertake with them. So yeah, there'll come a point that we'll need, if we're going to meet these timeframes, that we'll need to essentially make decisions, and if we identify policy positions that are too large to capture as this part of through this process, we'll need to come back and identify them for a later set of amendments, I would imagine.
Councillor Fowler, it would be very fair to say that I think Ainsley and the team are very aware of some of the false starts, as you put it, that have occurred with the other policy work, and that we will be looking to take a different approach of ensuring that before things get onto committee papers and in front of committee, that we avoid that if possible. We haven't quite got to how that's going to be done yet, but that's the next step. But I can definitely point out Ainsley's very aware of it, made it clear that we get endorsement to start, and then that we would come back with some detail of the steps in between, and how all of you as key stakeholders in this are engaged to make sure that we avoid that particular scenario happening. Did you have another question, Councillor Fowler? Any other questions, Councillor O'Neill?
Thanks, Chair. My question's around the removal of duplication with state laws. I know that you've said here some examples: Public Health Act, Environmental Protection Act. Is it going to go as far as looking at, say, shared pathways and behaviour on, riding behaviour with e-bikes and things like that on pathways, or is it too soon to ask that question?
Through the chair, I think, as I said, the focus is certainly going to be on the transition of existing provisions into our new local laws. Policy positions that require, substantial consideration may be out of scope. But yeah, when we start the process of consulting with each of our internal stakeholders, if they feel that they can, if there's an easy fix or workaround, we might identify it and include it in this. So I can't speak specifically to that particular issue, though. No.
I just bring that up, Chair, because I think there's a local law around dangerous behaviour on shared pathways, things like that, which is, fairly ambiguous and very broad. And we don't have the jurisdiction really to even ask anyone for ID. So it's sort of, I think that sort of thing should be really looked at because it is starting to be a problem in the city.
Ainsley, were you looking to add additional comment there?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Councillor O'Neill, I'm cognisant that the state government has just released a new set of road rules around personal mobility devices, or PMDs, which you're referring to, electric scooters, electric bikes, etc. And also that we are very limited in our local lawmaking in that we can't be inconsistent with any state legislation. And as they are the legislator in that instance, I think we'll find that we are very much constrained to what part we can play in trying to enforce or control the use of shared paths and roads. So as Stuart said, we will have a number of stakeholder workshops and work with General Counsel to see what, if anything, we can do to augment or to support. But largely what we've found with our local laws is just the opposite, that we've tried to play in the space where the state already legislates, and it's more a case of we're going to have to pare back what's in our local laws. But noting your concerns with that, Councillor O'Neill, and we'll see what we can do.
I absolutely think that we should pare back. Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? In that case, I would seek a mover for the item. Councillor Patterson, a seconder. Councillor Martin. Councillor Patterson, would you like to open debate?
Thank you, Chair. There's been a lot of work being done here, and it's interesting that we haven't reviewed this since 2016. Yes, we're taking guidance from the state, but we are making this something that is really relevant for our city. So thank you very much for your work. I appreciate that it's just beginning, and delighted to support it. Thank you.
Anyone wishing to speak against the item? In that case, Councillor Patterson, you happy to take those close? We'll close debate. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimous. Stuart, Ainsley, Joe, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate the work on that one, and a lot more to come. Councillors, that takes us to item 6.3. We welcome Jennifer, Jordana and Lisa into chambers for today's presentation and questions. Looks like we've got Sam with us as well. Councillors, so it would be helpful on this one. I'd like to try and get through the presentation, and then if we can hold questions to the end. Seems to work flow-wise with these ones better. So if you just wouldn't mind, if you've got questions, record what slide it was on, and we'll come to them all at the end. But over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. So today I'm going to be presenting an update on our new planning scheme and our local growth management strategy, and in particular the findings from our recent urban change engagement and reporting on the next steps of where we go to next, particularly around engagement. So for the new planning scheme, you'll see there's been a number of actions that have happened since our last update. Several projects have been initiated to provide technical background. There is integrating the findings of urban change readiness into the implications into the planning scheme, and a review of architecture and the structure of the scheme is underway. We're testing to confirm the best structure for the way forward for the planning scheme. In terms of the local growth management strategy work stream, so you'll know that there was a workshop last week that was held with yourselves to discuss the LGMS directions and the growth opportunities as we're drafting it. We've also provided an update to the Planning Scheme Advisory Group on the LGMS growth opportunities. The draft LGMS directions paper is now under review by our key stakeholders, and the feedback is to be incorporated into the final version. We are anticipating presenting the LGMS directions paper back to Council in May for endorsement to commence our next round of engagement. In terms of the housing work we're undertaking, the Housing Needs Assessment report has now been finalised, and the work is now informing the development of the LGMS directions paper, and that project will now move into the next phase to explore housing policy directions. Particularly around our urban change readiness project, which is a component of the LGMS. The work that we've done since our last update, we have finalised the outcomes report and our community growth priorities, and you'll see that that report is attached to this agenda item, and I'll go into some of the findings of that in a moment. The community growth priorities have been identified through the report and are now being integrated into the LGMS directions paper. And preparation of close-the-loop engagement activities is now underway to share these findings and the next steps with our community and stakeholders. So just by way of summary for our Urban Change Readiness Project, so the purpose of this engagement was to gather our community perspectives on growth and urban change, explore some emerging urban change scenarios, and to define community growth priorities. The city is expected to grow over 1 million people by 2046, so it is imperative we consider how this growth will be managed. We conducted an engagement program including surveys both through GC Have Your Say and through an independently recruited market research panel. And we undertook workshops, including a workshop with Junior Council, a number of special interest group workshops, and a number of Vision for Change workshops with our community. Undertaking the engagement both through GC Have Your Say and the market research ensured that we received balanced geographic and demographic spread in our responses. Over 3,000 community responses were gathered through this process, and we would like to thank the community and the councillors who participated with open, thoughtful and insightful interactions. We generally found our community had a moderate awareness of growth, with around 50% or less currently being aware of the growth that the city is currently facing. The community did identify that growth can bring challenges but also opportunities. So you'll see up on the screen challenges including traffic congestion, loss of green space, affordability and infrastructure pressures were the key challenges identified. But the opportunities of growth that the community told us were around creating vibrant communities, being close to jobs and amenities, providing housing choice, improving public and active transport, and the environmental benefits the planning can achieve. There were diverse views on the overarching approach to growth management. This included maintaining the urban footprint and focusing growth into our well-serviced neighbourhoods close to an enhanced public transport infrastructure. So you can see with these findings, the majority of the GC Have Your Say and workshop participants found this approach to be sensible but challenging or better. This is a very strong result, acknowledging the community have ownership of the challenge, understand it, but believe that it will be difficult. The GC Have Your Say respondents, however, did find this approach and growth in general a bit more challenging and a bit more unthinkable. Supporters highlighted benefits to this approach such as the environmental protection, increased housing choice and affordability, improved access to jobs, reduced pressure in coastal areas, and an efficient use of the existing infrastructure. We presented 5 urban growth scenarios through the engagement. Market research respondents generally viewed all scenarios positively. Through the GC Have Your Say survey, respondents were a bit more challenged, particularly in scenarios 1, 2 and 5. You can see up on the screen there. they were finding some of those were a bit more challenging. Some of these differences are likely due to differences between the two groups. Younger respondents generally expressed a greater comfort with all the scenarios, while older respondents and those residing in the coastal corridor south and the city spine south were more likely to find the scenarios challenging and unthinkable. Synthesising all of the findings that we gathered through this engagement, these are the community growth priorities that have been identified. So you'll see that there is a balanced distribution of growth, environmental protection and enhancement, well-serviced neighbourhoods supporting diverse urban lifestyles, movement choice, community amenity services and infrastructure, high-quality subtropical and nature-connected urban design, housing choice and diversity, jobs and opportunities, and building trust. Building trust was identified as a significant challenge throughout our engagement. This does underscore the need for concerted efforts to build social licence, particularly around the infill style development that is anticipated for the city. There is a community expectation that these priorities will be used to inform our LGMS directions paper, the new planning scheme, and the broader program of work that's undertaken across the city. These will be complemented by the technical policy work that goes along with these areas of interest. Building on the engagement that's done to date, we've also identified some future engagement principles that we would like to use to inform the upcoming engagement both through the LGMS and the new planning scheme. So these include aligning the city's planning policies with the community growth priorities, starting with the LGMS directions paper, continuing our transparent and impactful engagement and growth planning, building social licence for infill development through engagement, and equipping city officers and councillors with the tools to lead urban change conversations. The next task we have is to report on these findings back to the community and our stakeholders through a Closing the Loop campaign. So this will include a number of activities, emails to our participants to provide the feedback back to those who participated of where we have taken their findings and what happens next. We're likely to have updates. There'll be a monthly update email that is sent through our GC Have Your Say City panel to alert those who participated through that forum of the findings. We are preparing a short video that will summarise the findings that can be provided to those who participated and can be uploaded to our website. And there will be new content provided on our web pages to update the community as to where we're at and where we're going to next. A number of social media posts will also be prepared to help guide people to the right information, show them the videos and show them how they can participate into the future. Following this, community growth priorities are now being used to inform the development of the LGMS directions paper, and that will be subject to a future engagement planning, which is currently underway, once we present that back to Council in May. Once again, we would like to thank all those who participated in the engagement program, and we do encourage ongoing participation as we progress through the LGMS and new planning scheme. Part of this process, we will be looking for expressions of interest for those who want to participate, particularly around our community reference groups and industry reference groups, and we will be also looking to engage with the state through a state reference group as we move through the LGMS and new planning scheme. So the recommendation today that we're asking for the councillors is to note that this progress, to note the outcomes of the Urban Change Readiness Project, and particularly the community growth priorities, the future engagement principles, and those closing the loop activities. And that's the end, if anyone has any questions.
So, councillors, I just wanted to remind everyone that this presentation has been provided to you separately in email. So you are welcome to give it to any interested members of your community or groups in your community. So some of that charted information that we went through is there for you to be able to give out to people, and it'll be reflected in the minutes of the meeting as well. With that, questions for officers? Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Through you and probably to the EGM, it's a related, but not specific to this part of it. Whilst we're doing this this scheme and growth management strategy, I would appreciate research or assessments of other cities that have done this well or not so well. And the particular one that comes to mind is Auckland City, who put in considerable amount of funds, particularly to change a movement choice. And it's kind of assumed that it's, well, identified that it's been a bit of a failure, quite frankly. An extraordinary amount of money spent, and it's caused a lot of problems, and I just do not want us going anywhere near there. So, Chair, I don't know whether this would be, I was just thinking whilst I was listening to this is something I really want while we go through it, whether it's a GBI item, asking for an assessment or a report back on cities, including Auckland City. But if I could just get comment on that.
Do you want to go first?
I was only going to say it's interesting you bring up the New Zealand example because we've actually had a fair bit of discussion on it, and you might recognise that our acting GM has a slight Kiwi twang to her voice and was able to get us a lot of insight from our Kiwi friends. But Alicia and Trina, if you want to give a bit of comment around that.
No. Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Patterson, it's a really good point. It's something that we've been doing the whole way through the process. So the Auckland example is real, and it's something that we've had great discussions with our team, and our chair's correct that Trina was able to gain a bit more insight from connections that she has over there. So happy to do a report. We can sit down and brief you, might be easier. There's a lot of information in that goes through and a lot of work. We're not just looking overseas, though. There's a number of different local councils in SEQ. We've obviously got really good relationships in with them that we're talking about, other parts of Australia too. So it is a key focus to give you some confidence of us. It's been something that we've spoken about as a team from the start. We're never going to get these things perfect, but I think learning from the colleagues that we have in the industry as well, it's something that we'll continue to do. So happy to do a report if you need, but also happy to sit down and brief you.
I think too, so Alicia and I are in Melbourne next week and have meetings with Melbourne City Council to talk about where some of their recent policy work has been very successful and where some of it has not been so successful. So it's definitely been a topic of conversation in our regular fortnight meetings. But I think something to come back of, where some of our policy ideas have come from, where we've picked up pieces of information from other states or jurisdictions or countries and what we've accepted and haven't accepted. But there is definitely some very real learnings from what the central government did in New Zealand, that while it has driven down housing prices, has created a raft of other issues that they might regret going so hard the way that they did. We're very conscious of it. But we'll put a bit of thought into how it's best to present that back of where that thinking from around the country and around the world is being brought into here and what the key learnings are. Councillor Martin, your question.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the slide before you were closing the loop with stakeholders, I was just keen to get a copy of that, or councillors might, if it's different to this at all. If it's exactly the same, I don't need to, but I was just keen to get a copy of that. We've got it? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. I've been pretty impressed with the resources that have been applied to this massive exercise. I did request a meeting with the consultants, Mal and Shannon, at the workshop arising from the workshop the other day. I just wonder who might facilitate that, if that's them and me, or if someone in the team is able to assist.
I'm happy to facilitate that for you, Councillor.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I can promise you Mal and Shannon will be happy to talk for hours. Getting them to shut up will be the problem. Can I make that offer? So I think nearly everyone here today was at that workshop. Mal and Shannon are incredibly open to meeting with individual councillors if you have more specific questions or want to get more insight. The more individual councillors that meet with those officers, and I'm hoping a couple of members from the team at the same time, that's of great benefit to them, and I would encourage you to take that opportunity up. Any other questions? I had Councillor Neal first and then Councillor Doran.
Just to add to that, Chair, I think that they said that, and I'm sure that you guys said too, that if we wanted to have a group of residents that we wanted to explain the results of some of these surveys too, that they would be very happy to do that. And I know that in my area I've sort of flagged that I'd like that. So I think it's there for us to take advantage of.
We're happy to facilitate that also, Councillor. If you just let me know when and where, we can organise that with officers and with Mel and Shannon.
Councillor Doran, your question?
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's the slide before. I'm curious as to, this is future engagement principles, but they're not actions in the community. Is that just a continuation of the work that's being done? That is the engagement principles, yeah. And can you give me some sort of context around how we're going to, during that process, build the social licence for infill development? I mean, it was listed as in the have your say as one of the problems, and the trust being an issue, and that's probably something that I'd like to be able to get some context around today as to how that is intended to be actioned.
Through the chair, yes. So these future engagement principles, we're undertaking our engagement planning for the next phase of engagement. So these are the principles we're applying to make sure that that engagement does cover off on all of these principles. Yes, in terms of sorry, is in question about the
building social
licence. I think the social licence aspect, it is the continual transparent conversation with our communities that we are planning through our LGMS and planning scheme process, continually getting their feedback and ensuring their feedback is heard, understood, and going back to them. And the closing the loop is one aspect of that, where we can get back to the community and let them know how their feedback has been used to inform the next stage of our LGMS and planning scheme development.
A really good question, Councillor Doran, and I appreciate the answer. I'd be interested from other councillors' opinion. Like, that to me has been one of the main things I've heard from community members, not just my own division, but from right across the city as I travel around, is that they want to see where their feedback has been incorporated. And that's not always necessarily that it's it's led to a yes. It might be that we heard your feedback, and while it's led to a slight change on something, we haven't been able to do it completely. It's just as important. Be honest with people and say we haven't been able to do exactly what you sought, but it's going to look like this instead. But that closing the gap part, this will be the first of several times we do that. And it's the beauty of having that collected group that is right across the city, is that we've got that engaged group that we can go back to every month, every 6 months, how often as we need to, and make sure that what we think they said has actually been reflected back in policy, so that these guys can come back in front of you all and say that with confidence. Otherwise, we're on a path to hiding if we can't do that. Jen, were you looking to add on that? Khan, you're in the chamber, you may as well have a crack.
I just got answer, told me to come. Sorry, my voice is a bit croaky. Thank you, everyone. I think part of the building social licence, and specifically infill development, is quite important there. A lot of the growth the Gold Coast has experienced to date has been one type of, very general, one type of infill development along the coastal corridor, and then a lot of growth has been through new greenfield development. The LGMS directions and that kind of approach of urban consolidation is starting to point to more infill development having to happen all across the city, and what that might mean, some of the challenges and issues and opportunities that might bring for communities. So having a real engagement principle that's specific to building open, transparent discussions around what can work, what isn't working, what's going well, sort of piloting and then actually reviewing what worked, what didn't, and then working with the community to actually reassess and change, and actually proactively looking at it as a building social licence over the next 10 years with your community, industry, and also council as an organisation, how those three elements can actually come together to talk about, we are infilling, how do we actually build a social licence or trust with the community to actually do this. And it's more of an objective that you look for those opportunities in everything you're doing. And I'd actually commend you for actually putting out the report that we did in its whole entirety. Is one of those examples of building trust where you actually are openly sharing the results. You're not just providing a short summary, one-pager, you're actually giving the detailed results of what the survey did tell you, and actually showing how you are actually now integrating that feedback into the directions as well. And that's something that's continuing to be developed throughout the directions paper as well. So I suppose it's that an objective of always thinking that, and how do we actually proactively build social license, be transparent, and how we're having conversations around infill development is really critical. And you're already doing a lot of that already.
So, Jen, thank you for the extra detail. I think the other part for me with this as well is that we're not going to get social license before we implement a new scheme. Like, it's not thinking that you get social license in 3 years in a new scheme. It's actually that decade comment to me that, we're going to put things in the new scheme and we're going to see DAs and see things built that possibly don't reflect what the community thought or what we thought. It'll then be the ability to be honest and say, well, it hasn't achieved what we hoped and we need to make amendment to it. And that it is a long-term goal over a decade period is probably the realistic period of where we'd hope, as we take pulse checks of that particular question over that decade period, that we slowly start to move the dial to a greater level of trust in all of it, social licence. Councillor Doran, did you have a follow-up question before I go to Councillor Gates? Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to make the point that rather than distributing the whole package, we really need some sharp and concise messaging, because the people who have an interest in planning, they're limited, the numbers are limited, and for most people they'll have no understanding at all of the things that we've discussed about broadening infill across the city. And if we want the trust of our community, we need to be really clear about, in my view, this is my personal view, about what is being discussed and what is being proposed, because there's no use in adopting a new planning scheme and not having had the broader community on that journey. And quite frankly, I don't think we're taking them on the journey if we distribute a comprehensive document that people just won't read. So we need some really short and sharp messaging, in my view, that lets people know along the way what is being considered and gives them the opportunity to have a voice so that we know what to proceed with and what not to proceed with.
So while a statement, officers can respond.
Through the chair, yes. So in terms of the closing the loop, we're certainly developing up web content. A short video is being prepared to help summarise and digest this content easily for those members of the community who, yes, the report is quite lengthy. In terms of the future engagement through the LGMS directions paper as well, that's what we're looking at from a planning out our engagement activities of how we can provide the content in a user-friendly way through our websites, through videos, through to use to educate and inform the community as well as tell them and get their feedback on the directions paper. So we are looking at a number of ways to engage, not just through a document itself.
I think, Councillor, it's a really fair point, Councillor Gates, but interestingly, there are some individuals and some groups that if we don't have the full report available to them would say we're not being transparent. So what I get out of that is we have to be prepared to pump in the resources needed to be able to tailor stuff that for the majority who would prefer tailored and summarised, we have that. But then for other individuals and groups who want more detail, not even just the report, but then want to be able to sit with officers and interrogate detail in it, are we prepared to put the resources and time into that? And the answer is we are. Councillor Young.
I'm glad to hear that.
Sorry, I was just going to say, that linking to some examples, somewhere who's just recently done that really well is Infrastructure Victoria, have just put out a very technical document on the Infrastructure Victoria needs to grow well. The technical document is there, and then they've made these really nice little online web content snapshots that actually say, this is what this direction is, this is why it's important, here's some of the initiatives we are doing, and what I would add to that is here's some global examples where they've done this well. So almost some of the things you were just talking about, you can actually package things up really well, but it just takes a concerted effort to make sure you've got those two-pronged kind of people who want to know a lot, people who would like to just to learn and have a more high-level summary. But that's how those two things could actually come together.
Councillor Young, your question?
At the forum that we had the other day, the workshop, there was comment made by a couple of councillors, probably including myself, that PSAG's input is really vital, but it is quite dominantly representing the development industry and consultants to the development industry and so forth. And a comment was made that there's the potential to introduce or include other elements of our community in that, with that kind of level of engagement, and I'm particularly interested in the environmental sector. And I just wonder what moves can be made in that direction, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Young, the industry reference group and the community reference groups are standalone groups that once, really in 2 months' time, we start to engage with them and do the same level of workshops that we're doing with PSAG. PSAG is there on the technical side. It is where officers can test wording against them and make sure it's not going to lead to unintended consequences. The reference groups as a separate set of groups to make sure that the community input and that the industry input is handled in the right way is really important. PSAG, the terms of reference, also allows for us to bring in people as needed. So an example, when we get into design codes in the low density area, while we have one architect on PSAG at the moment, we can bring in additional people. When we're dealing with the environmental policy, we can bring in people in that interest. So I guess I'm trying to say we're very cognizant of that. We can bring in people whenever needed, but we made a decision and council agreed to it that it was best that community especially had its own reference group to make sure that their input wasn't lost in amongst consultants and their part, and that even the industry part. So I've had some people from the industry a little bit annoyed that they weren't on PSAG. It's because we've purposely gone for people from outside of the Gold Coast to be on PSAG that can bring a non-Gold Coast click set of input into it. I'd offer to you, buddy, if you have any concerns, that happy to talk about it more. And all councillors have an open invitation to attend PSAG. So if you wanted to come along and I think get a sense that the advice and feedback being given from those PSAG external members is very balanced. And in fact, quite often through a lens of how would the community respond to this? Because they're all aware that there's no point pushing too hard on one agenda if the community isn't going to hammer us during the statutory process. They've been very cognizant of that, but feel free to come along. I've said enough in that. Alicia, Trina, did you want to add to that at all?
Just quickly, Mr. Chair, Councillor Young, the expressions of interest for those groups are nearly ready to go, so they'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks, and the aim is to hold those community groups and the industry reference groups starting from May. So that's all happening.
Excellent. Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Director.
I think
I supported the development, the creation of PSAG and the representation there. I think it's really a vital focus, but I'm just a bit concerned, and that gives me some comfort. Thank you.
That's right. I think the only thing I forgot to say was there will be some times where we put all three of those groups together, where we put industry reference group, community reference group, and PSAG in the one room and pretty well lock the door until they come to agreement on some things. And other times we're keeping them separate to make sure that we specifically hear how they're putting it, how they're wording it is captured and then dealt with properly. But again, would encourage Councillor Doran is coming to them, Councillor Gates is coming to them. It's an open invitation to any councillor that wishes to come along, especially when we get into policy-specific stuff, environment, architecture, whatever it may be. If that's where your strongest interest is, or you feel your community's strongest interest may be, you're most welcome to come along. And I'd encourage, so the minutes go out, and I'm really appreciative of the detail in the minutes and the content in the minutes. They go out to all councillors after every PSAG meeting. Please do read those, and if you've got questions prompted from that, the team are eager to hear those, because it all helps cut weeks and months off the back end of this, the more of that discussion that happens up front. Councillors, any other questions for officers? In that case, is there a mover for the item? Councillor Young, a seconder. Councillor Patterson. Councillor Young, we've spoken on it a fair bit. Did you wish to add anything else? Yeah.
I'll turn it on. It's a massive exercise, as you well know, Chairman, that the city is progressing to create a new town plan, and there are various stages to it, and we've been engaged in the first stage for more than a year now, and there's good representation from industry, there's good input from specialist officers throughout the entire city, and indeed councillors, and we have a big challenge ahead of us to make sure that we engage with the community and bring them along the journey so that we're truly representing their interests, their aspirations for the city in the town plan that ultimately becomes law and guides our future development. Thanks, Chair.
Any speakers against? If you would indulge, I just wanted to point out it is nearly 12 months for this team on a very big work program. I think Councillor Young made an excellent point. Like, we are throwing a tremendous amount of resources at this, and we made some really strong commitments as a council of how this was going to be done, how it would be done differently to the amendments and to how the last city plan was done. That comes with the need for resources and external resources. We have Jen here today as one of those, but Mal, that was mentioned, and Shannon are external resources, and there have been several others brought on recently. So I just want to acknowledge the team for a very big 12 months. If you can't tell, it's a team that is particularly passionate about this. Jordana and Trina, the entire team, resourced properly, but also with a hell of a lot of passion to make sure this is done and done the right way. To make sure it is, but your involvement is key. To all those councillors who attended the workshop last week, I hope you got a lot from it, because I can tell you the officers got a lot from it, and that I've already seen some amendments to a few things to reflect your input of that workshop. So I'll just make the ask again that you are key stakeholders in this, and I hope you feel like you're being treated as such, and that we are going to continue to lean on you, probably more and more heavily, to attend those workshops, to take up individual briefings, to request meetings with Mal or whoever it may be, because to get this done in the time frame, we need all of you to be out there having those conversations with the community and then reflecting that information back to officers. Councillor Young, you wish to close it all? In that case, debate is closed. I'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll take a 5-minute break just for a toilet break before the DA. Meeting adjourned. Councillors, I recommence the meeting at 11 past 11. We welcome Mick and Roger and Curtis into the room to discuss item 6.4. Councillors, this is Curtis's first time presenting to council as well, so we'll take no jokes about mustaches and porn stars or anything like that. We'll be very kind to him. Curtis is very good at copying a bit of flack and stuff. But yes, Curtis, good morning to you and welcome to your first presentation to the Chambers.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, good morning, councillors. My name is Curtis Luck and I'm presenting item 6.4, which is a development application for material change of use to establish a retirement facility and residential care facility at 8 Marina Quays Boulevard, Hope Island. The site is located within the centre zone and subject to a building height overlay of 33 metres. To the north, east and west, the site adjoins the newly constructed Delta Hope Island townhouse development. To the south, the site abuts Marina Quays Boulevard. The subject site is located within the Hope Island District Centre, which is currently improved by the Hope Island Marketplace, the Hope Island Tavern, McDonald's, a service station and a retirement facility called Esperance. The proposed development is subject to assessment against the Marina Quays Variation Approval, which is a preliminary approval varying the effect of the city plan to establish the Marina Quays Mixed-Use Development Code. The Marina Quays Variation Approval varies the effect of the Centre Zone Code to introduce site-specific assessment benchmarks. All other sections of the city plan, including the strategic framework and relevant development codes and overlays, remain applicable to the subject application. The Marina Quays Variation Approval was established as an outcome through an appeal in the Planning and Environment Court on the adjoining site. The city plan lists the proposed land uses as subject to code assessment. However, the Marina Quays Variation Approval varies the relevant table of assessment to include additional triggers for impact assessment. The proposed development is subject to impact assessment because it exceeds the building height identified on the building height overlay map and does not provide a minimum of 1,000 square metres of gross leasable area. The proposed development seeks to establish an integrated retirement facility and residential care facility within 2 high-rise residential towers. Each tower has a building height of 15 stories and 49.5 metres. Sorry, I was one ahead. The applicant, Odyssey Lifestyle Care Communities, is an experienced aged care provider on the Gold Coast who delivers a residential product for retirees with a higher level of support and care than standard retirement facilities. Based on the characteristics of Odyssey's existing development at Robina, the anticipated average age of residents for the development will be approximately 85 years, and the average time of accommodation is expected to be 3.5 years. A key consideration of the development application is the proposed building height of 49.5 metres, which exceeds the 33-metre code accessible building height designation. Specific outcome 3.4.4.15 of the strategic framework anticipates increases above the code accessible building height, where 9 criteria are complied with. This is commonly referred to as the uplift test. The strategic framework outlines that mixed-use centres are intended to facilitate the highest levels of activity and intensity. As detailed in the planning report, city officers consider the proposed development complies with each criterion of the uplift test, and the development reflects the desired building height profile and built form intensity envisaged by the city plan. Throughout the assessment process, city officers and the applicant engaged in several workshop meetings, which resulted in amendments to the building design, including the provision of additional timber soffits, concave mesh screening, and metal cladding to break up portions of painted concrete. The proposed development does not include any commercial or non-residential activities that contribute to providing a minimum gross leasable area of 1,000 square metres, as required by the Marina Quays Variation Approval. City officers have had regard to other relevant matters, which are considered to substantiate support for the proposed development. Specifically, the proposal will provide accommodation and care for a vulnerable group of people. The site is well located to house an ageing demographic and promote social interaction, given its close proximity to essential services within the Hope Island District Centre and broader locality. The proposed development also provides for a level of ground floor activation and a range of activities akin to that of a mixed-use development, includes ancillary elements such as staff workstations, medical offices, a hair salon and cafe, which will generate employment opportunities, provides a public plaza with shaded seating area on the ground floor to facilitate social interaction, Includes a 100 square metre community room, which members of the public will be able to hire through an online booking system. Involves significant pedestrian activity generated by residents, visitors, staff, and members of the public, and provides a new raised pedestrian crossing across Marina Keys Boulevard, which contributes to a safe and pedestrian-orientated centre. The proposed development provides a total of 50 resident spaces, 28 visitor spaces, 4 motorcycle spaces, and 26 staff spaces. Odyssey has proposed to operate a 12-seater community bus from the development, which will be used to transport residents to events within the community, scheduled appointments, and other Odyssey developments. Therefore, City officers consider the proposed development meets Performance Outcome P01 of the Transport Code. During public notification, 137 submissions were received, consisting of 126 properly made objections, 8 not properly made objections, 3 submissions in support, and a petition with 80 signatures objecting to the development. The key matters raised were building height, land use, traffic, built form appearance, and shadow impacts. Therefore, City officers recommend the development application be approved subject to conditions. Are there any questions?
Curtis, thank you very much. I have Councillor Gates for the first question.
Thanks, Chairman. On page 210, it talks about the MQVA being approved by Council on the 4th of June 2019. And then it says, shortly after the parties consented to the Delta Hope Island development being approved. Who are the parties referred to there, please?
Through the Chair, the Marina Keys variation approval was a negotiated outcome through an appeal for the Delta Hope Island townhouse development. The parties were Stocklands and Council of the City of Gold Coast.
Stockland and the City agreed to approving the Delta Hope Island?
So during the appeal process, the subject site, which is now for the proposed development, was excised from a broader allotment.
Yep.
And then there was agreement between the parties to lodge the preliminary approval with the variation request. And once that was approved by Council, Council would essentially consent to the Delta development being approved.
Oh, okay, because I thought it was a court-ordered approval because of the low density and the 2-storey height limit, but Council actually approved the preliminary approval that permitted that development. I'm just concerned about the change from 2-storey to this extent of height. That's my only question for the moment.
So, officers, can I just get clarity on that? And I apologise, Curtis. Roger might have to give the clarity on this one. So, the prelim is the important part. There's a prelim over the site that's been adjusted to allow for this. So, Councillor Gates' concerns of 2 storeys on this aren't a problem.
Through you, Mr. Chair, appreciate the concerns with the Delta development being 2 storeys. The Marina Keys variation approval and the city plan envisage high intensity development on this site. So it's unfortunate Delta is 2 storeys. It is incongruent to Council's planning vision for the district centre, and there are mechanisms to support the height proposed via the Planning Act, Section 45.
Thank you for the explanation. I just had the understanding that it was court approved and Council approved it. That's all I wanted clarity on.
I saw Councillor Young's hand jump up there.
Yeah, I just wanted to interrogate the that development in the proximity, if you don't mind, Chair, because we're in public session here. So do you mind going back, Curtis, to the aerial map of the site? Either of those will do. So this red bit was drawn out of the Delta.
Through the Chair, correct.
And all of those other properties in that proximity are 2 stories.
Correct.
And yet on the western side of Sickle Avenue there, it's much taller.
Through the Chair, they were 8 stories in height, approximately 30.
Which might be represented better on your other photograph. Thanks, Curtis. Yeah, so that blue area to the west of the bridge is 8, 9 stories?
Through the chair, I believe it's 30 metres in height.
30?
And there's a number of towers there.
And so do you think that was the original aspiration for this site, to have all of that blue in the vicinity of what became the delta? Was it originally the aspiration in the city plan and the approvals for Hope Island to have it all at a higher density and higher building?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, this is a district centre. There'll be the largest, more intense development forms in a centre.
Okay. Thanks. I'll leave it at that for now, Chair.
Questions? Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Doran, then Councillor Fowler. And did I see Councillor O'Neill's hand? Not yet. That's cool. So we'll start. Okay, we'll start with Councillor Patterson.
Through you, Chair. So just confirming that for us to support this, we would need to find that it has an excellent standard of appearance of the built form and street edge. Is that correct?
Through the chair, correct.
Yeah. Page 233, as to the reasons why our council's architecture assessment section felt made comment on that. I don't really see any comments. I don't. When I read that, it's not conclusive to me that it's excellent. It reflects bits. So I suppose beauty's in the eye of the beholder. For me, I cannot see that. Can you clarify how? When they're saying that the use of screening is reduced on certain sides, there's proposed provides of long lengths of facade, how we consider this anything more than reasonable in terms of its appearance.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the term excellent standard of appearance is contextual. This is a centre zone requiring the most intensive development form. It's important to note that north of Sickle Bridge, there are a number of developments of up to 8 stories in height that have a similar floor plate to this proposal. They're in the medium density residential zone. So part of excellent standard of appearance and sense of place and local identity is to have regard to the context within the locality. So officers have had context to, Curtis, do we have a slide to demonstrate or show the other residential developments within the area? So we've had regard to what's in the locality to form our opinion in relation to that strategic framework test. So the 2 high-rise buildings closest to you, they're on the other side of Sickle Island Bridge. They have a similar floor plate to this proposal in the medium density residential zone. This is a centre zoned development proposal where the highest and more intensive development forms will be located. So we've had context to those developments.
If I may, thank you, through you. So I appreciate how those other buildings would be considered for context with regard to local identity and sense of place. I think this is the first time that I've heard, though, that we look at, there's something, that you might not define as excellent built next door, so we can use that for context when we define excellence. Where would I refer to see that excellent standard of appearance is contextual?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we've had 2 very recent cases in Palm Beach in the centre, the S&S appeal and the tower on the other side of the road. Both were on that context of them being in a centre as opposed to the medium density res zone.
And can you confirm that those decisions weren't based on local identity and sense of place?
Through you, Mr. Chair, those two examples were based largely on them being in a centre.
So,
and the context behind them being in a centre.
Okay, so I get that, and that's why we have those two criteria of local identity and sense of place. I still don't see how that relates to excellent standard of appearance. So my question again is with those decision, and it would be good to read the decision. Is it referring to that specific criteria, or is it referring to the criteria of local identity and sense of place?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the term excellence is contextual, and the comments from our city architect have actually said this is a well-designed building based on its context. It's a similar building length to the towers that we see on the other side of the bridge. It has a number of elements that Curtis has conveyed to you, and our city architects are supportive of the development in relation to an excellent standard of appearance.
Thank you. Chair, could you point to me in the council's assessment on page 233 where they have said they consider it a well-designed building? Because I don't see that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the first line, the proposed development is considered to achieve a high-quality architectural design outcome, which will contribute to the Hope Island District Centre.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question about the waste disposal and the access, which I flagged yesterday. And I'm not a traffic engineer, but if we could just get some commentary around the proposal to reverse in at the location of the roundabout, past the VXO into the portraiture to collect the waste, and just the commentary around the city officers' view that that's doesn't present any safety risks or any elevated safety risks.
Through the chair, the swept path diagram in the waste management plan actually identifies the waste collection vehicle as entering the site in a forward gear through the new roundabout connection.
On a forward gear?
In a forward gear.
Right.
And then essentially passing through those two columns and then reversing into the waste servicing point.
So going towards the entry?
Towards the drop-off area, and then it reverses back into the waste servicing point. And then the driver will then manoeuvre the bins in front of the truck.
Yeah.
And then it can exit the site back through the roundabout in a forward gear.
My mistake. I read exiting in a forward gear and I made an assumption that means entering in a reverse gear. So apologies for that. My next question is about the parking ratio. Acknowledging that it's a different use to residential, the report indicates that an acceptable outcome of parking is 208. I'm referring specifically to the resident car parking, acknowledging the staff and the visitors car parks have been interrogated and have their own metrics. But the 208 that's required in the centre zoning, and there's 50 provided under this application, it does, to me, leave me a little uncomfortable with that ratio. Could you talk to the logic the city officers have used to arrive at this being an acceptable performance outcome?
Through you, Mr. Chair, 208 spaces is part of the AO. You're quite correct there. Just like to refer you to the PO on page 262 of your agenda reports. And we must be cognizant that the site is located in a district centre, and our centres-based approach to car parking is to somewhat discourage private motor vehicle access to that centre and to encourage other forms of active transport. So PO1 actually says we're located in a centre zone, maximises efficiency of car parking, reduces congestion of car dependency and encourages alternative transport options. So that's the test. So yes, 208 spaces is the threshold at an AO level. We elevate the assessment to the PO, and that is the assessment that officers have made here. Okay, it's a little bit long-winded, Chair, but okay, I'll carry. Perfect. We've broken the car parking ratio requirements into 3 categories, and first up is staff. So there are 26 car parking spaces for staff. We have the application is for a maximum of 22 staff on site at any time. We have conditioned that there be no more than 26 car staff, and we've conditioned 26 car parking spaces. The reason for 26 is to allow for some overlap between staff coming and going. So we believe that staff is fully looked after, fully compliant with the AO requirements. In terms of visitors, we're mindful that this is a retirement facility for high-end users, and the ratio requirement for visitors is 64, and they're supplying the equivalent of 30 car parking spaces, which comes to a ratio of 1 space per 7.7 residents for visitors. This is very, very similar to the Chevron Island Odyssey approval that was based on 1 space per 7.3. So it's slightly more liberal than the Chevron Island approval. We've got data from the Odyssey developments in terms of peak times, peak visitation, and peak visitation during the week seems to occur between 6 and 7 p.m. at night. So we factored in that peak visitation by visitors is likely to occur when there's not such a demand for parking within Marina Quays, 6 to 7. So worst case, if there ever was a demand for visitors to be outside of the site, don't forget there are equivalent of 30 spaces for visitors, that we're not actually competing directly with other users within the district centre. So that's our rationale for visitors. And lastly, in terms of residents, councillors, the AO does say 208. They're supplying 50. It has to be acknowledged that the average age expected for this development is 85.3 years old. In our opinion, it's very unlikely that there'll be a high take-up of car ownership by residents of this age cohort. So that provides one measure of justification. I'll refer you back to PO1 that says that there's a deliberate intent within a centre to discourage the use of private motor cars and to use other forms of transport. There's a bus, a private bus that's associated with the Odyssey developments, a 12-seater bus, and we've actually conditioned that as part of our recommended suite of conditions for the use of that. So we believe, yes, AO says 208, but we are reliant on the assessment benchmarks to assess this application, and in our opinion, the car parking is sufficient for this development.
So if you have a follow-up to the car parking question, definitely. We'll finish your questions first before I go to... I've got Councillor Young on the list.
Thank you. I wasn't that long-winded. It's fine. A personal disagreement with the number of 50, and it's not. It's a professional disagreement, but it's not a reflection on officers' determination in this space. I note, and my question relates next to the 1,000 square metres of GLA that's required under the MQVA. Roger just mentioned before that one of the considerations provided for the car parking ratio was that it's a centre zone and moving within the zone. And one of the requirements under the MQVA is to provide 1,000 square metres of GLA. I don't see any street-facing retail and street activation under this approval, noting the plaza. It seems to me to be a missed opportunity, especially if we want people to stay within that precinct and not use a car. Curtis, could you give some commentary around why it was deemed okay to leave that element of the MQVA out?
Through the chair, city officers have had regard to the matters of public benefit in lieu of the requirement for 1,000 square metres of gross leasable area in this case. And as outlined through my speech, those matters were the new raised pedestrian crossing from the north to the south of Marina Keys Boulevard, which will not only benefit the proposed development, but also residents along Grant Avenue and the Esperance development through providing safe access to the Hope Island Marketplace and other facilities. The public plaza as well is also an intrinsic design element of a centre, which is currently lacking in the Hope Island District Centre. And there's also a number of reasons outlined in the planning report.
And through you, Mr. Chair, further to officers not requiring specifically compliance with the overall outcome in relation to 1,000 square metres of gross leasable area, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are two sites on Broadwater Ave on the cusp of this district centre that equate to approximately 5,300 square metres of gross floor area, 8 Halcyon and 12 Halcyon Way, that are on the cusp of the district centre, that somewhat do provide some ability and logical geographical expansion of the district centre to incorporate those two sites within our contextual argument. Also, it's important to understand that this is a aged care retirement facility that is proposing up to 40 staff on the site, maximum 22 at any one time. And the types of activities that staff will actually serve is registered nurse, enrolled, endorsed other types of nurses, resident doctor, carers, wellness, nurse manager, high care, moderate and services, palliative care, dementia care, short-term care, rehabilitation support, cafe workers, hairdressers. So even though it's not technically a commercial development, it's quite clear that this is a genuine employment generator, this development, and that is different from a typical multiple dwelling development.
Chair, just in response to the commentary about the uses within the precinct, I think they're uses that we would expect within a retirement or aged care facility rather than ancillary uses. I don't have any questions, but I do have a change recommendation when you're ready. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Add Councillor Fowler next, and then Councillor Young, and then back to Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of my questions have been asked and answered, but I guess I just wanted to just talk more in regards to the car parking rationale. So I do also share concerns about the car parking numbers and just the understanding that we have 208 independent living units, we have 50 residential car parks. We're making on the PO1 a decision that we're trying to encourage in centre zones active travel. So just to give some context, as part of a nearby development, there was a SARA condition that a bus zone be put into Marina Keys Boulevard, which was just in between the two roundabouts. It's that gap there. So there was a huge outcry by the community because there is the demand for on-street parking in this centre zone is really high, and TransLink had put in a temporary proviso for a temporary bus zone in that location. And through my work with Nick Prasser and his team, we determined that TransLink have no intention of putting in a bus stop there. They have no intention of increasing public transportation in this area of Hope Island at all. So I just wanted to make that clear that there is no public transport that will be added to this centre zone, and we have that in writing from TransLink. But what I wanted to interrogate is the visitor car parks, because when we're talking about a development of this nature, is it city officers' position that this type of aged care would have more visitors than a normal development in your experience? And if so, under the normal city plan provision on 208 units, we would be looking at 1 in 4 for visitor car parks, which would be 52. And we're sitting here at 28. So I just wanted to get some thoughts around the visitor car parking ratio as well. My main concerns being the spillage into street parking, which we don't have, and the shopping centre across the road, which is at capacity most of the week.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can only make an assessment on the information provided in the application before us, so it's impossible for officers to provide any comment in relation to what we consider the envisaged intent was, apart from the information that we've been provided. We've based a lot of our visitor car parking assessment on the Chevron Island Odyssey development, which is basically the closest development that we can consider is suitable to apply our assessment benchmarks to. As I said, it's a very, very similar visitor car parking ratio to the Chevron Island example. Very, very similar. And we have data about, numbers for the Odyssey and Odyssey Robina. We have the amount of visitors that the Robina example gets. We've also applied that data to our assessment for this application.
And so it's city officers' opinion that that's enough visitor car parks based on the experience with other developments?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that has helped us formalise our recommendation to you today, yes. And also having regard to the benchmarks within the city plan and the Marina Quays variation approval.
Okay, but my understanding, Roger, was that the city plan actually has provisions, so this actually should be 52 visitor car parks. And just being aged care, I would expect there'd be, hopefully, more visitors will be visiting these people than what would be a normal residential building.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can't comment whether this development will get more visitation numbers than other retirement or aged care facilities. We don't have that data.
Okay. I'll just move on to height if I can, Chair. We had 126 objections and another 80 on a petition. I just want to acknowledge my community in that. The majority of those did come from the Delta community as well as other areas in Hope Island, and one of their primary concerns was height. So there's two things here. I think when we're looking at the centre zone and Hope Island and also over the other side, the tallest buildings in Hope Island, it's really 20 metres shorter than this proposed development. Am I correct there?
Through the chair, correct.
So we're talking about an interface with a surrounding community that is 2-storey townhouses, and then I get that that's not the density we were hoping for on that site, and that's a real shame that what happened, and I appreciate that. But I'm sure those residents aren't happy about looking up at a 50-storey 2-tower development with some shadowing over their pool in the afternoon. And I get that that's not perhaps a moment for refusal in a planning and environment court, because I get that seeing something doesn't equate to an impact. But I just think that interface between the 2-storey townhouses to 2 50-storey towers is overbearing in my
Councillor
view.
Fowler, I'm trying to give as much rope as I can, but this is question time. So
Yes.
you're well and truly into debate.
Okay.
Let's get to a question.
Apologies, Chair. So do we feel like the development is overbearing in consideration of the Delta 2-storey community?
Through the chair, I guess there's a few aspects to that answer. In terms of the interface with the Delta community, I've got a few slides. So on the screen is the northern interface, where the development achieves a 19.6 metre building separation from the townhouses. On the eastern side, it's approximately 6 metres to the communal open space, and then much greater to the next habitable room. And on the western side, a range between 13.1 and 14.6 metres, which almost prescribes no setbacks and would allow built-to-boundary developments in areas like Palm Beach. We consider that this is an extremely generous interface with the Delta community. I guess acknowledging the characteristics of Delta being 2 stories, the applicant has incorporated a range of landscaping treatments around each boundary with a number of canopy trees, as well as acoustic fences and lighting aprons to ameliorate those amenity impacts. In terms of the local identity, through recent decisions in the Planning Environment Court, it's extremely clear that you need to look at the forward planning intent for the site, despite the existing developments in the locality. When looking at the strategic framework, it seeks for the highest intensity developments and the tallest buildings to be located in the centre. Specifically for this site, this is the centre of a centre, which we think warrants the highest level of intensity and height.
And through you, Mr. Chair, officers have walked through the Delta development, and it is a really strong observation that every dwelling within the Delta development that faces this development either has their garage doors, walls, or bedroom windows. Every outlook from every dwelling within the Delta development adjoining this development site looks away from this development. And as Curtis has said, there is a significant distance between the buildings on Delta and the tower. So as Councillor Fowler said, you can observe this proposal, but are residents of Delta adversely impacted by it? And the assessment team believes that they're not going to be adversely impacted. Another observation too is that we've got shadow diagrams at various times of the year: summer, the autumn, spring equinox, and the winter solstice. And the only shadow that will be cast upon the Delta development is the swimming pool recreation area in the afternoon. The shadow does not reach the dwellings. So shadow is not an adverse impact. As I said, the outlook of the dwellings on Delta is looking away from this development site. And as Curtis had a slide up before, there is a significant distance between the actual dwellings on Delta and the tower. So yes, they'll be able to see it. Are they adversely affected by it? We don't believe so.
Further questions, Councillor Fowler? Councillor Young, you're up next.
Thanks, Chair. Curtis, you mind going back to your slide 28, please? Thanks. So, am I right? The photograph and the image are kind of not consistent. There, one's showing the photograph, the delta's on the left, and the proposed development's on the right of the fence, whereas the image shows the reverse of that.
Yes, correct.
Thanks. So what I can see is consistent with what Roger just told us, that principally those buildings on the left-hand side, we're just seeing garages and only a few windows, small windows. I'm not sure about the far end, what those windows are. They seem to be facing more towards the development site. And I'm not sure about swimming pools. There's just one, is there? And that's the facility
Through
for
the chair,
all
correct. That's their only communal open space area. I acknowledge that during public notification there were a lot of submissions raised about shadow impacts on the communal open space area.
Yeah.
However, a natural consequence of just where it's located, I might just pull up the, is that a code accessible building would cast the exact same shadow over the swimming pool in the afternoon, and the proposed development, the additional shadow is at the end of the shadow. It would be cast over the internal road.
Sorry, in that photograph, where is the new development to be? Is it on the right-hand side or?
It'll just be directly in front.
Oh, behind the fence. Okay. Casting a shadow across this pool.
I might just show
pretty
you
much every day during the summer in the afternoon.
I think it's just important to outline that a code accessible building would have the exact same shadow impact at the exact same point of the day as a proposed development, with the extra shadow generated by the proposed development being the end of the shadow, which is cast on the internal road.
Right. So just going back to the car parking, and I appreciate that the officers would have drilled into this very sincerely, but I'm also concerned a little bit about the numbers that we've arrived at. I accept that in a centre development, the AO is all about avoiding car usage and encouraging other forms of transport. Obviously, other forms of active travel here are pretty much not relevant, because we can't expect these folks to be riding bikes. And there is basically no public transport available in this area. And I think Councillor Fowler's drilled into that a bit and determined that there's no intention to create public transport. So the centre development code applies to centres across the whole city. It's not specific to this, and there's some places that I would argue are more centres than this, being a centre. I think perhaps the shopping facilities on the island are more central to the needs of the community than this building or this site. And we've got 324 people possibly going to be living in this facility, and we're only allowing less than 1 in 10 of them to have a visitor, seemingly, if we assume one vehicle per visitor, maybe visiting 1 or 2 people. So that just seems a little bit low to me.
Councillor Young, only for fairness, because I pulled Councillor Fowler up. Is there a question, or are we in debate?
Oh, sorry.
Just to be fair.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm sorry. Roger wasn't long. Roger was not long-winded, and I've making up for him. Except there's a community bus and all that sort of stuff. Is there the capacity for us to increase the number of car parks without affecting the development form?
Through the chair, during the assessment process, there were extensions to the basement area to increase the number of car parking spaces. So we've already explored, I guess, the extent of basement which can be occupied by car parking spaces.
So through you, Mr. Chair, without a complete redesign, no.
Thanks, Chair.
And I appreciate, I've got Councillor Gates, yes, and next Councillor Martin, but I just want to get into the car parking part a little bit more. So officers have been provided with evidence from traffic engineers of data from other Odyssey sites. Were there any other sites, any other purpose-built aged care sites that were included in that data, or is it just Odyssey locations, Roger? Or Curtis, sorry?
Through the chair, we requested surveys to be done at the existing Odyssey site in Robina. However, stage 4 of the development is currently under construction, and they weren't able to provide accurate survey data. So officers relied on the other rates, such as the Chevron Island development approval.
Okay.
Yep, that was my question. Roger did mention the Chevron Island, which is still under construction, I believe. Whereas obviously Robina's occupied, and I just wondered how much data had been gathered from them to inform and give confidence to this recommendation. So the existing development at Robina, have they provided information about the number of car parks or cars that their occupants own? Please.
Through the chair, yes, they have. At Robina, they currently house 167 residents across 153 apartments. There's a total of 44 car parking spaces available for the 153 apartments. However, only 35 of these spaces are currently occupied. It is important to understand that Odyssey charges a monthly rate for car parking spaces. And they also have interviews with residents before they obviously sign into the facility, advising that there are limited car parking.
Yep, so there'd be people that would sell off.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Gemma.
And back, following the list, I was back to Councillor Gates.
Thank you. I just have a question about how the average age is determined and what happens, please, through the chair, if someone 65 or 70 wants to buy one of these apartments. How can we possibly know that the average age will be 85?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that has been conveyed within the application material. That is what Odyssey have said is going to be the average age. We have discussed this with the applicant, and the applicant has said that they're not prohibiting other demographic groups to actually come in. And in fact, there may well be some 65-year-olds who suffer from extremely poor health who do want to utilise this for because of the high care that is provided, and so they offer palliative care treatment. So that's part of the common application material. That's what's envisaged and that's based on the Robina age group, but it's not prohibiting younger people from accessing this facility.
It could be possible too that couples might take advantage of that situation, so there might be a younger partner and an older partner who want to be close by each other, and that sort of aged care is helpful. I'm concerned about a few things, and I'm not going to get into debate. Could you tell me how far, you mentioned the 5,000 square metres of gross lettable area nearby, how far would it be for these people to walk to get to that level of shopping amenity, please? Not just across the roundabout, which you know I had concerns about too, but to the other shopping that availability in this centre zone. How far would it be for these old people to walk, please?
Through the chair, correct. The 333 metres was a measurement done on the footpath network to access the sites south of Broadwater Avenue.
Is that across a 4-lane road?
Through the chair, correct. However, yeah, there are pedestrian lights through that road network.
See, I just don't believe that this is practical in any way if it truly is suggested that these people will be 85 plus. But I'll leave it at that because I'm not getting into debate. No. I made up one.
Councillor Martin, we're with you.
Thanks, Chair. Question on car parking. There's you mentioned about vulnerable or those with medical issues. I just wanted to confirm emergency services parking, be it reserved for ambulances. I imagine that might be permanent spaces. How is that factored into the numbers?
Through the chair, as far as I believe, there's no requirement to provide a space for emergency vehicles. However, there is a large drop-off area just adjacent to the lobby, and if emergency services are required, they could park there.
Okay, this is obviously not. I'm not au fait with these services, but yeah, I imagine that would be quite a frequent event around ambulances. So officers satisfied that, I mean, I suppose if there's a drop-off, if there's another car there, wouldn't there need to be a dedicated spot for ambulances in such a...
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, there's not. I think what practically happens when there's an emergency, if an ambulance needs to come, they will park as close to the front door as they can. So we don't sort of, in planning, kind of plan for emergencies. We make reasonable assumptions to accommodate the daily use requirements. But in the event of an emergency, I think you'll find an ambulance would park close to the front doors. They'd park on the street with their lights on. They'd do whatever they need to do to actually get access to that building, which is no different to any other aged person's accommodation.
Okay. And thank you, Chair. Just one other one where you had the distance to the 300 metres to the nearby commercial and retail. Would it typically be, though, that our blue centre zone, that would be where that type of commercial development would be housed? I mean, if from a purely city planning perspective, it's in the blue area that we would want that type of activation. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the two Halcyon Way examples were approved under the former 2003 Gold Coast Planning Scheme, so they're not part of, technically they're not part of the district centre, but they were approved and developed under a different planning regime.
So would it be, though, within our centre zone, we would be anticipating that commercial activation is happening in our centre zone with our highest and most intense use? I'm just interested from a city planning perspective. I would imagine that that's really what we want to encourage in that centre zone. Am I reading that right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's now zoned medium density residential, so the two examples in Halcyon Way are not really congruent with what our expectations for the medium density residential zone is. But like I said, they were a product of a former planning scheme.
To clarify, thanks, Rog. I'm talking about the blue area, in that I know this is underdone in terms of the commercial space. So I get the medium density, former town planning scheme. We're obviously foregoing retail and commercial activation in our centre zone, and I'm just a little concerned that's not the intent of the design.
Roger, does the centre zone specifically say there has to be retail commercial, or does it talk to intensity of uses?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's more of a macro sort of issue. Every site doesn't necessarily need to have a mixture of envisaged land uses. The whole idea is that eventually the centre will have different components. So, no, it's not envisaged that each site has to have a commercial component.
Thank you. So that really crystallises it for me, in that not every site has to carry the load for a centre zone, but within this current area there, the blue area, do any other sites carry it? So I get that not one development has to, but it seems like none of the developments carry any commercial within the centre zone. In the blue. Okay, so why is it showing 300 metres to the other services instead of just to the blue?
That specific slide with the 300 metres was to answer the question of how far away the additional GFA is, and Councillor Fowler can talk to it. That there's a Hope Island shopping centre is directly across the road from this site.
And that counts for the GFA?
Absolutely, in the centre zone.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Patterson?
Thank you. Could you show me where the bicycle spots are? And I'm not advocating for another 200 bicycle spots. Could you just show me where they are? I couldn't see it on any of the maps.
Through the chair, are you looking for the resident staff or the visitor?
The cyclists, whichever they are. I don't know. So I understand that you have got 27 proposed bicycle parking. I just couldn't see on a map where they actually go.
Through the chair, the bicycle, I'll just put it on the screen.
Where, sorry?
So just below visitor number 7, there's 10 visitor bike parking spaces.
Oh, okay.
I'll just show on the... And then you'll see just west of staff number 70, there is the staff and resident bicycle room.
Okay. So it's interesting that when you do your reference for Odyssey that no one rides a bike, probably not all that surprising. If you're not well enough or capable to drive a car, you're not going to be riding a bike, most likely. I'm just curious what you think, given what we're ending up with is effectively one bike space for every 4 car spaces. So I would think, based on that, you're thinking that every 4th person that comes there is coming by a bike. I'm looking, it really is that we're basing this on the people who are moving here are not largely capable of driving cars. I was wondering if there's more efficiency that can be used for that space and you can get another car park or something.
Through the chair, the 17 bicycle spaces in the basement are for resident and staff.
Yeah.
So potentially you could look at reducing the number of resident spaces. However, you would need some sort of quantum for staff who choose to ride to work.
Well, according to Odyssey, no one rides to work there either. So there's no use of bicycles either by staff or by residents. It occurs to me it's going to be an empty space that never gets used, whilst if they wanted to convert it and go, okay, no one's actually using this, is it possible for it to be converted to a car space?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think where these particular bike spaces are, Councillor Patterson, I couldn't tell you whether you could get a car space in there with the columns.
Okay.
So I'm not entirely confident we could. I think
Okay.
The bike parking spaces are kind of applied across all developments with our policy to try and encourage different forms of transport. So I don't think anyone is really suggesting that an 85-year-old is going to be riding their bike everywhere, but there may be staff from time to time that would.
Would they have motorised scooters or something like that?
Through the chair, potentially there is 4 motorcycle spaces provided on the ground floor.
Oh, right.
So that's actually a really interesting point. So largely, a lot of people who scooter around on not a 2-wheel, but a proper, what do you call that thing? Mobility scooter. And that's probably how you get into the shopping centre.
Yeah.
Where do they go?
There's a footpath.
Where do they park? And is it viable for them to be driven to the supermarket? Because, I mean, if you look at Ashmore Plaza and Domain, there's a highway of those things that go around. So where do they go, sorry?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is an assessment against the city plan and the Marina Quays variation approval. There are no assessment benchmarks for the requirement of mobility scooters.
So I appreciate that. But where do they go? Because people are going to want to have them. So where do they... Yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm curious. That's actually how people are going to probably get around, right? So I don't know. Do they get driven up to a unit? What do you do with those? I actually don't know. I'm seriously asking a question.
Through the chair, the applicant hasn't provided any information on that, but I presume that it could be stored in each individual unit.
Thank you.
Are we questioned out and ready for a motion? So before I go to Councillor Doran for his motion, I think we've had a really good example today of something in the new planning scheme that needs to be addressed, which is we know we have a desperate need for purpose-built aged care, yet we currently assess purpose-built aged care through the multiple dwelling code, and it keeps throwing these problems up. So know that this is one of a lot of key outcomes in the new planning scheme is that purpose-built aged care needs its own code so that we don't have this problem again in the future. And that should be built on analysing not just Odyssey sites in the Gold Coast, but other purpose-built aged care around Australia of what is the right car parking ratio. While not answered today, mobility skills, like there are actually things that getting it right in the code to make sure that purpose-built aged care providers don't get caught up in these kind of impact assessments in the future. So on that, I promised Councillor Doran I would come back to him with a change recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. So the change recommendation is on the screen, and I'm happy to speak to it now, or would you like questions?
So I have a strong suspicion you have a seconder, Councillor Doran, so we might seek a seconder for the change recommendation, then you can speak to it. Look at that. Councillor Gates the second. So Councillor Doran, I won't trigger debate yet, but I'm happy for you to explain the intent of your change recommendation, and then if there's any questions from councillors, we can do that.
Yeah. So very quickly, so absolutely respect the view of officers in arriving at where we did today and the detailed explanations. The change recommendation seeks to do two things. It seeks to rebalance, in my view, the resident car park ratio of 50 to 208 units to 188 units to the same level of car parking that was endorsed by, under the plan and endorsed by officers. And the other part of the recommendation seeks to enact only part of the 1,000 GLA that is envisaged under the MQVA and makes the 200, which is an already demised pocket within the design, and turn that towards street-facing activation.
Is there any questions on Councillor Doran's change recommendation from any councillors?
Not a question. I could create a question out of my complaint.
Okay. Did you have a question to the change recommendation, Councillor Martin?
Yeah, look, just now I've got the floor, I may as well ask the question. Obviously, the question was around reducing one story, being level 13, but I imagine the top level has services and things like that. So well, essentially, that would come down a level. So we're talking about taking a level out of the middle, aren't we? Because there's things on the roof that need to be there.
Councillor Martin, that's actually an excellent question, because while it does specifically say it has to be level 13, possibly it shouldn't restrict that, because there is a whole raft of services up on the roof, and the intent is just to reduce it by a story. So does it have to be level 13, Councillor Doran?
It does not have to be level 13, but that was taken, Chair, as a typical floor plates, and I'm just trying to find, I think it went from level 5 to level 13, and it was 20 units per floor. So it was just to take out a specific amount of units that would rebalance the ratio.
Total number of stories. The total number of stories would be less.
So, while I appreciate, could I seek some officer assistance? I just would like to make sure that there's no point specifically saying level 13. If we understand the intent that Councillor Doran is trying to get to, what words would we use that reflect that? Do we have to nominate a specific level, or can we just...
So through Mr. Chair, page 333 and 334 of the agenda. So 333 has got the typical levels from 5 to 13, and then it's the penthouse levels on 14. So it probably makes sense in my mind. I'm not sure what the guys think to have 13 removed.
That's asked and answered. There seems to be confidence that level 13 is the right one to do, because it is one of the typical ones. Yep. Unlucky level. Okay, so councillors, we have a live change recommendation that's been seconded. I'm going to foreshadow the officer recommendation, but we'll deal with the change recommendation first, and I invite Councillor Doran to open debate.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll just build upon the explanatory statement I made a few moments ago to acknowledge what you said before, Chair, about this being assessed against the medium density code, and that leaves it to a level of subjectivity where the professional officers arrive at a position here through working with the applicant and And then we also assess it against that performance outcome as well. I think the desire here to reduce one level is to reduce 20 units to bring it to 188. And I still make the point there at 188 units and retaining the 50 resident car parks, the 26 staff car parks and the 28 visitors car parks still is, as assessed and an acceptable outcome, is still sort of 150 car parks short. But I acknowledge, to speak for myself, the fact that this is a different development type and this is a different use, and not every resident's going to have a car. I fully accept that. I note about the point of the development around orientating some of the street frontage to a shop. So when you're in a village environment like this, street activation is really important, and it might seem at one point not to be because there is a significant development site with the shopping centre across the road, but you want to get into the centre space where you have street activation on both sides because you will grow. You will grow. There are further developments to occur in this area, and there will be a further need for more retail, and it adds for greater uses that might not be already catered for within the precinct. And if the desire from a city centre is to limit car travel, ultimately that's to allow for people to get what they need for short-term trips within that walkable distance or that rideable distance. And the planning instrument we're assessing it against also envisages that up to 1,000. So I'm not indicating here that we should mandate that full 1,000. I'm suggesting that there is a 200 square metre opportunity in there that can be turned into street facing and not compromise the safety or the integrity of the building, but also it will look towards assessment against that MQVA. And I think ultimately part of this assessment also requires a mix of land use. And we didn't really talk about that, but a mix of, a mix of land use in this context is being considered care versus aged retirement facility. And whilst that's a mix, they're like cousins more than completely different, you know. And so I think a mix of land uses would be better prescribed under a piece of retail on the ground floor, and then your aged care and your care facility from there. So this motion that I'm putting forward today seeks to not be an extreme against the development. It acknowledges the benefits that it will bring to Hope Island and the benefits that it will bring by bringing this product to the market, and noting that the applicant has a good track record of delivery of developments that they've received, approvals they've received, they have delivered, and they have a high quality offering that they provide to the market. There is just an ingrained issue I have here with the car parking rebalancing. I think that this outcome is a common sense compromise that seeks to build upon the expertise of the officers and respects some of the views of the community, and I hope to gather everyone's support.
Is there a speaker against the change recommendation? Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. And Councillor Doran, I actually would have supported this, but without the extra commercial space, because I really think that a community room is really important for a building like this. And I've got a couple in my area, and I've got one just about beachside. And I do believe that they should have more visitor parking in this building, but I can't support them all because I think it's a particular building built for a particular purpose, and they don't need to have commercial space like you're talking about. They will have their own commercial entities in there, as Roger pointed out. So, unfortunately, sorry, Councillor, if you wanted to take that out, I'd be happy to support that.
A speaker for the change recommendation, Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chair. I still don't understand how the age of the end user can be determined or averaged. So that gives me concern about the car parking allocation. And it also gives me pause if indeed the end user is an average of 85 years old, because their ability to engage in active travel is very limited. So I don't think anyone in this room has a 93-year-old mum except me. And so I have a very, very good understanding of the needs of the elderly and the visitation. And I am really concerned that the number of visitor car parks that have been provided are nowhere near sufficient, not just for the people who are very ill, but for other elderly people. The need to check on them regularly is very, very clear. And so for those reasons, and the fact that I don't want to see old people crossing the road through a roundabout to get to a place to have a coffee if they are with one of their grandchildren or whatever, you know, it's so much nicer to be able to go downstairs in the facility and have a coffee away from the residence room without them having to travel. Most at that age will be on walkers, and I'm going down to see my mum this weekend, and you know, it's really hard when your parents or your grandparents get to this age, and I think that we should be paying a little more respect to their needs, and this doesn't really cut it for me.
Any other speakers against the change recommendation? Against the change recommendation? Councillor Patterson? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I do support the reduction, and I share Councillor O'Neill's concern. I would like to know more about why that community room is allocated before we remove it. I have a number of aged care facilities in my division. The community halls are used on a very regular basis. So I'm not comfortable with this one. I do acknowledge that the applicant is intending on providing a product that is sorely needed in our city, but I think we've seen a lot of reasons why, as the Chair mentioned, our planning criteria that we have really is a bit of a square peg in a round hole. I can't support the community room aspect of it. I do have a lot of concerns about how people actually do what the current planning scheme that we're using is not considering how these people really would like to move around and engage with their community. That is not present in this document. I realise we've got to go with what is present to us right now because that's the legal framework that we've got to work with. And because of that, I would support this recommendation if it removed the element of taking away the community room. Thank you.
A speaker for the change recommendation, Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. So I am supportive of this today, even though I do feel like it doesn't quite go far enough. Just to be clear, this site was on the basis of an approval of 1,000 square metres of gross leasable space. When that non-compliance happened with the developer, the trade-off was that they would create a community room for the public, but for the public, and then they would do a cafe which the public couldn't get access to because they would need to go through a reception area. And to me, that just wasn't enough in terms of the loss of 1,000 square metres of gross leasable space. We don't have any community groups in Hope Island except for a Rotary who has a facility. We're not like other centres. So I actually do support this in terms of the trade-off of that community space, 100 square metre room that no one's going to hire, based on my experience as a local councillor. And if the space next to it, which is a workstation, staff workstation, if we combine those two spaces together and we end up with 200 square metres of like a front-facing cafe or a florist or a gift shop, like I think that activation across that footpath is really fantastic for the Hope Island Centre Zone, which, let's be honest, hasn't eventuated into what any of us would have wanted it to be. This is an element that will actually enhance that activation, which we desperately need. So on that proviso, I am supportive of that part of this motion. Removing one story, I guess that's a reduction in height, which isn't really impactful, but the 20 units that it would take out, who would be reliant on that car parking, I think would bring more of a balance to the reduction. So I think that these two amendments are really good outcomes for the community, and if this does get up to date, I will be looking forward to seeing those amended drawings.
Speaker against the change recommendation? I'll offer Councillor Martin and Councillor Young the opportunity to contribute if they wish to. Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm supporting the change recommendation. I think when we are seeking maximum uplift, that it needs to ensure that we're ticking all the elements of all the boxes, and I think the significant shortcomings, especially around visitor car parking, I absolutely acknowledge the benefit to the elderly community and the service they're providing. That's fantastic, but for me, the deficiencies in the areas that I don't think quite meet the performance outcomes we're looking for the maximum uplift. That's why I'm supportive of this change. I think it brings it more into balance while still supporting the developers' endeavours around this elderly community.
Councillor Young, do you wish to contribute at all? No, that's fine. Yeah. Councillor Doran, due to close.
Thank you, Chair. So I think that the process here today has been really helpful, and I'd like to acknowledge where I was wrong. Yesterday I raised a question around the waste access, and I obviously hadn't done my homework, so I appreciate you guys clearing that up for me today. And I think what also the experience today has crystallised, obviously, what Councillor Hamill's indicated around the future planning scheme and the gaps in the future planning scheme that is seeking to fix to alleviate these differences of the performance outcomes in such unique developments such as Odyssey. I reiterate and point that this is a high quality operator that has delivered excellent product on the Gold Coast and has intentions to continue to roll out more and more, and we should be supportive. This change recommendation shouldn't be seen as not supportive of the operator and not supportive of the land use and not supportive generally of the performance outcome that the officers have put forward. But it does and will speak to future discussions around retirement facilities parking and where street activation is required under whatever planning instrument we're measuring against at the time. I'd like to speak to briefly the community room element and make one last pitch to get Councillor O'Neill on board. In that it is, as I read the report, it is a bookable space, but there's no, I mean, if I'm a skeptic, Councillor O'Neill, there's no reason to think it's going to be available for booking at all times. It could be booked out by the operator for internal community functions or internal events, and I think that turning that particular space over to the street, and it could be operated by the operator, but it is street facing and accessible by the community, and not necessarily demising a certain retail outcome. It's open to the market to determine what the market needs. I think is a good way that both meets the MQVA intentions, albeit a fifth of the intentions, and also contributing to the local community and the street activation. I also will just close with the fact that these changes are only a compromise that I think is a sensible position that we arrive at. It's not a perfect situation. I don't think every councillor here will support every element of this change recommendation if it is supported by council, but I note that the commentary from the divisional councillor that Councillor Fowler, is supportive, albeit not a perfect outcome for her community, but a better outcome is my reading from Councillor Fowler's contributions today. And so I'll close with that, Chair, noting that this is a recommendation to full council, and I would like to get support today and then again at full council.
Debate is closed. Because we are altering an officer recommendation slightly, I'll call division. So all those in favour of the change recommendation: Councillor Young, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Gates, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Martin, Councillor Doran. Against: Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Hamill. The change recommendation wins. Officers, thank you very much. Understood. No, that's all right. Curtis, Roger, Mick, thank you very much. Appreciate that. We will move to our last item of committee, which is item 7.1, the quarterly appeals update. Welcome officers who have sat around patiently. Councillors, so we note that Councillor Gates and Councillor Young have had to leave to go to other meetings, but we still hold quorum. We're at item 7.1, which is the quarterly appeals update, which has come back to Council on the back of a general business item introduced by Councillor Gates a few months back. I note this item, if there are questions, we will need to go to closed. So is there questions from councillors for officers? There is. Is there a mover into closed? Move Councillor Doran, second Councillor Martin. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Please move us into closed session. streaming back on. Councillors, thank you. We are now back in open session. If we can just bring up the recommendation for 7.1. I'm happy to move that recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Patterson. All those in favour? The motion is carried. Councillors, there is one general business item that all councillors were given advance notice of. We'll move down to that now. This is the general business item relating to the funding for a pilot project for a 3D digital twin proof of concept. Is there any questions on this for now, or is it pretty self-straightforward? Councillor Martin.
Chair, really supportive of this. I'm just wondering, it mentions the city plan, but would this be able to be used for individual DAs in our process down the track?
So the answer is possibly. In other jurisdictions, they definitely use 3D modelling as part of assessment, especially to allow for shadow modelling and stuff like that. So the answer is yes, but we are a long way off from that versus where some other cities in the world are up to, and just getting a pilot up and going and proving that and amongst a million other things that a digital twin could provide us. But yes is the answer. Yep. Any other questions? Councillor Doran?
How confident are you of the pricing?
For the pilot, I believe the EGM is very confident.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Doran, so we've got a team that's extremely excited about this and have been working on it in the background. Extremely excited. For a few years. Yes. So I'm confident in what they've said. They are expensive though, so this is the first part to actually do it. We will come back to council though and we'll explain exactly what Councillor Martin just asked about. Can we expand it? There'll be a number of future states that we could use with this, but to start it off, we just would be able to use this to get the basis going. And I think we're confident at a point. We've done a bit of market testing at the moment. There's a number of different consultants that do it, so we've checked that for this. Yes, is the example.
Alicia made a really good point there. Like, this is going to be a much bigger project, like while it's coming through planning, and it's definitely much with an idea to use as part of the planning scheme. Digital twin and BIM modelling for infrastructure and other areas is where the city has to get to. So, this will hopefully be proven up and used in planning straight away, especially with the new planning scheme, to help communities understand what areas might look like, and we can actually play with live models with buildings. But it's got a much bigger whole of city implication for the organisation that will turn that 100,000 into a lot more in the future. Any other questions, Councillor Doran?
Nope.
So if there's no issues with the GBI, I'm happy to move it, unless if there's a seconder. And Councillor Martin, all those in favour? GBI is accepted. And then Councillor Martin, I have a question on notice from you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Question on notice. We had a petition lodged. It was accepted into council on the 20th of August 2024, and it related to a development application, OTH/2024/17, which was the concrete batching plant. The resolution number is G24.0820.068. I note that petitions, normally, especially when they're related to DAs, come back at the time that the DA is being assessed. But this particular petition had some development compliance matters and issues are related to other parts of that site. And just noting the time and my community wanting an update, just requesting that a confidential briefing at this stage be provided to councillors for consideration around some of those issues, if there's any parts of that petition that can be addressed prior to a DA.
So through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Martin, if you're comfortable, Mr Chair and Councillor Martin, what we might do is just do a confidential memo to you. If you can send me that petition, and we can send that out as soon as we can.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that.
Councillors, I didn't have any other GBIs put forward to me. So if there's nothing off the floor, which I won't accept anyway, I will close the meeting at 13:04, and thank you very much for your attendance.